And we're live. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi, everyone.
Evening. Michael's the first one in. Evening, Michael.
Hello.
Hey, Greg. How's everyone doing?
Sorry we're late.
I'm excited to be here.
Hi, Greg. Hi, Russell. Hi, Reese.
Hey, Reese.
Hi, Reese.
How's everyone doing on this fine Easter Sunday evening? I've got a nice cider.
Oh, nice. Like I said, I'm already quite a bit of wine in with today.
Got me a bottle of water.
Well, I'm on a monster now to try and just wake myself up.
I got tea and sugar-free cream soda because it's what we bought yesterday.
Fair enough.
Well, tonight we are being joined by Mr. Ricky Johnson, who represents a few different sort of names and stuff. You've got your sort of things in a few little pies.
Absolutely.
But,
described like that.
Yeah. Also, for those who don't know, which are potentially on here, most of the people on here maybe and watching perhaps may have not come across you, or the Herp HQ or AHH, etc. Do you want to introduce yourself and what sort of all those things are?
So hi, I'm Ricky. I've been in the hobby for just around a decade, keeping all sorts of things, mainly focusing on lizards, but now in my job as an animal care technician at Halesowen College, I care for all sorts of taxa, pretty much all of them that you mainly see across the hobby. But yeah, so I'm a part of Herp HQ, which is a two-man team, myself and Sam Perrett. Sam Perrett being the starter of Herp HQ, dragging me on to make content. And also, we actually live really nearby each other, so it works out really well. I actually just came from his about 20 minutes ago.
Nice.
So that works out quite nice for working things like this out. And of course, I admin Advancing Herpetological Husbandry. I'm actually one of the later original admins, rather than a founder or co-founder, which are more sort of Daryl, Francis, and people. If you know of Advancing, you'll know those names. I was originally brought on.
Reptile keepers would have heard of at least Francis Baines, hopefully.
Francis Baines and Francis Kaskiri as well.
Oh, of course, Francis Kaskiri, yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah. And
hey, Meg.
Hi, guys.
Hi, Meg.
And yeah, so I was originally brought on the advancing team, more as actually like because I at the time was apparently seen as quite good of like working with people online, speaking to people, wording things well. I was brought on as a as butt soother was the phrase, because some of the original admins had quite strong opinions and ways of dealing with people, but to attempt to change the hobby and ways people think they needed to be more approachable. But since then, I've just become like a normal admin doing all sorts of weird stuff. At that time, I was only a student in animal care myself. But now I've been working in the industry for just over 4 years, I think now, as an animal care technician at Halesowen College. Which we have, I don't know for 100% sure, but one of the widest exotics collections in the country in terms of herptiles and invertebrates, which is quite exciting. And most of that has happened in the last 4 years, which is quite cool. I'll probably in a bit be able to share screen. I'll show some of the stuff we've got on our system actually, because I can get our system online.
Oh, that'd be awesome. That's brilliant. Yeah. Hi, Anton AD. Cheers for joining. Well, you say you was a student, and when you were brought into Advancing Herpetological Husbandry. So that is, well, it's a Facebook forum, isn't it? That one,
Yeah.
primarily, but it's kind of grown into more than just a Facebook forum over the years. As I've when it first started, to the point where there's conferences now.
Multiple conferences
back after all the lockdowns and everything, which is a fantastic weekend.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Always. Hey, Annie. So how much? I mean, with the conferences, for those who don't know, it's a 2-day conference, basically discussing all matter of things herpetological. Really, it's really grown. I think I've been to everyone but the very first one.
Okay, yeah.
I think I missed the first ever one, but I've been to everyone since.
That means you've been to everyone that's hosted in that conference room that we're in, as the original one wasn't.
Yeah, I think the original was it because it's held at Drayton Manor Zoo, and I think the first one was in the education centre. And I saw the pictures of it, and it looked rather packed.
Yeah, so that was the one that opened our eyes. So we basically, obviously, Advancing started as just a Facebook group intending to change, and this is going to sound strongly worded, but frankly, it should be strongly worded because it was a big push, a big change. We wanted to change the hobby. We wanted to change the industry. A lot of the original admin and supporters essentially looked at the industry and were disappointed. Were unhappy with what they saw in terms of husbandry quality, welfare, education, just the things people know. There was a massive, stark difference between academics, between good zoos, good quality zoos, and then hobbyists. Obviously, that isn't 100% just a generalization. But it was disappointing. That's why that started essentially as an attempt to manually change it without shouting too much. There was a lot of shouting early on, but that's how you make a movement start. But later on, it ended up becoming more of just a forum for learning about anything herpetological. So how to care for your animals, welfare aspects. And we'd essentially offer similar to what actual education facilities would provide, but open forum online, that kind of quality of information. And then at some point we realized, okay, we've got an online presence, and frankly, that's great, but to many people that means nothing. So we needed an in-person presence, and societies are great, but in terms of making large change across an industry and hobby, individual societies weren't going to do it. So like individual localized societies that run groups and things wouldn't have done it. So we went, right, fine, let's run a conference and just get as many people as we can within the hobby and industry to attend, say hello, work together between zoos, hobbyists, academics, rather than having those walls between those things, and get a communication going, share information, and realize that the hobby is missing out by not talking to the zoos, and the zoos are missing out by not talking to the hobbyists.
Absolutely. Hey, Jim.
Hi, guys.
I think that's something I personally really enjoy about that conference is the mix of just the people that are there, of, there's zookeepers there, including, the curator of reptiles of Chester Zoo. Gerardo there presenting, but then you also got the trade there, you've got hobbyists there, you've got vets there, and everyone in between, all kind of nerding out about reptiles.
Trying to get like a wide range of representation, not just an echo chamber of we could have started these conferences with just the admins of Advancing talking, which is how some people that originally were against us might have imagined it. But in fact, I think the only actual Advancing admins that have ever spoken at the conferences are Francis Kaskiri and Paul Tapley. Because while Francis Baines and Roman Morin are involved, they don't have like a massive hand in the admin. They're there for other reasons.
Yep.
So we've only had multiple conferences and only 2 of our actual admins speak. So we attempt to actually have it wide range. There's many different zoos, academics, researchers, hobbyists, and representation from different countries as well, which we feel is really important.
Well, yeah. Well, this year you had the guys from Germany over, which was interesting to hear what they were doing,
Yes.
and also guys from the US, the beardy vet from Australia.
Yeah, that was fascinating.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
That what was it meant to be 45 minutes, but it ended up being like 2 hours. But that 2 hours flew by.
Yeah, that was definitely a talk that while it was happening, we knew it was going over in time, but none of us could bring ourselves to stop him.
Yeah, I think that's it. Everyone was sort of like, "This is so fascinating what he was saying about bearded dragons."
Frankly, we were all sat there like, "You go ahead and just stop when you feel like it," because it was worthwhile.
Well, that's it, and I think that's where like things like that are so. I just think because there's so many reptiles, the sort of, especially the very commonly kept ones, that are sometimes the research isn't necessarily done on them because we think we know how to do things. That well, we've kept them for X amount of years in captivity and bred them for X amount of years in captivity. We know what we're doing. And sometimes we sometimes need to take a step back and go, actually, do we?
Yeah. One of the big problems is the reptiles that we keep most commonly are the hardiest. Yeah. They are the survivalist animals. They are the ones in the wild that can deal with the most, like the biggest range of conditions and environments. So what they'll do is they'll survive in whatever they end up in.
Yeah.
You know, royal pythons, bearded dragons, leopard geckos, crested geckos, they are survivalists. So what we do as a hobby and industry is we basically take advantage of how hardy those animals are. And consider them easy to keep. When the closer to the truth is that those animals can be in bad conditions for themselves, for their physiology, for their mental health as well, but they will just keep going. So the industry and hobby will look at that and go, well, they're fine.
Yeah.
They will carry on. They're fine. They're living, you know, that someone will see a bearded dragon live over a decade and go, that's great, wonderful. What if in a couple decades we find out that the longevity of a bearded dragon in captivity can actually reach 35, 40 years? Yeah. I'm not quoting that as a thing. It's the kind of thing we find out.
Yeah, it would not surprise me if that's how long they should be living, is into their 30s. It's one of those things you often see plastered around the internet, or search for almost any care guide on a reptile, and it will say lifespan 10 to 15 years.
10 to 15 years.
It seems to be like it's like just this random number that people have plucked out the air. And
10 to 15 years is a meme. 10 to 15 years is an industry meme. And I mean, we've actually joked about that exact thing at work. The usual thing is that if someone's asked, a zookeeper will be asked, you know, how long does this animal live in? If it's not one of the obvious ones, I'll just be like, 10 to 15 years. Every sheet online, 10 to 15 years. It's all generalizations and guesswork.
It completely is. I mean, I know of a standings day gecko that is like 32, 33 years old.
Yeah, exactly.
And while it's in a zoo, and the person in charge, I think he's about to retire, but he hatched out that gecko and it's followed him around by ours zoos as he's gone along, so he knows exactly when it hatched out. And he's got to keep it alive just to see how long it actually lives for, because again, so you look online, 10, 15 years, like, well, clearly not. it's well into its 30s. You know, could it reach 35? Could it reach 40 years? So very potentially.
Francis Kaskiri likes to point this out quite a lot, that he's got a snake that's older than I am, a rat snake older than I am, and I'm 27. And that animal is, you know, perfectly well. It can carry on as well. It can go further. So does that tell us something about the longevity of the average herptile in captivity?
Right.
Now, I do need to stress here, when I say things like that, it does sound like I'm almost using the rhetoric of animal rights. You know, the whole high attrition rate and death rate of herptiles in captivity, and low longevity. No, I want the industry to thrive. I want the hobby to thrive. But if we don't admit these things and speak about them and find out the truth, then frankly, we're not doing good enough.
No, I totally agree. That's the only way, and zoos are the same. We're too quick sometimes to talk about our successes and stuff, and hardly ever talk about our failures, where we failed and things. And that's where you actually learn more by going, you know what, we messed up here, sort of thing, or and not just going, well, we've done this for so many years, it's fine. Actually, no, look at the cricket, though. Can we improve this? Is this actually right? And so, and certainly, some of the things that are being found out nowadays with the advancing in technology all the time, and people going out and studying animals in the wild. So, we're just learning so much more, and things that are sort of shocking people.
It opens your eyes and makes you realize that right this second there are probably dozens, actually probably definitely dozens of studies in progress right now that in a couple years or a few years, when they end up being published, will blow our minds about animals that we keep every day.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the ones I think, and you've done a video for this for Herp HQ, was Ben Owens with leopard geckos.
Yeah.
In the wild. They are one of these animals that, when I first got a leopard gecko 25 years ago, the way I kept that, it was horrific compared to, how I certainly keep nowadays. But even nowadays, you go to most places and most people are saying that they're arid animals and solely just arid. But Ben found them in very, very humid environment.
Yeah, completely different to what you'd normally imagine. And again, that's not a generalization as well. We're not saying that's only where they live. It's a way of pointing out that they live in a massive range of environments. And the ones that we got for captivity didn't necessarily come from an arid environment. So why do we keep them all arid? It's a tiny percentage of keepers are keeping them not arid. And that goes for even really artificial environments. A dry enclosure with paper on the bottom can still be considered an arid enclosure. Warm, dry. That's still an arid enclosure. And that's probably how most of them are being kept. And if I spoke about this when I was on the podcast with Dylan. One of the things to consider, like you said, 25 years ago when you got a leopard gecko for the first time, goes back again to these animals being survivalists. The first ones that come into captivity, usually, and it is in their case, will have been tons and tons. It will have been tons and tons of these animals coming into captivity, and it will be the ones that survive that are the ones that make it in captivity and end up breeding. And then the people who imported and kept them will more than likely not talk about the number of them that didn't make it from import to the successful captive keeping of them. And then what that means is we're also judging the success of them breeding in captivity by those original extremely hardy specimens when their offspring may not be. These are all ideas, not none of this has been proved out, but the opposite there is no data for whatsoever.
Yeah.
And frankly, we have to look where the data points, where the information points, and go from there.
No, absolutely. And I mean, for me, when because Ben presented at an AHH conference,
yeah,
I saw that, and like some of stuff like what, yeah, it's always say got to have a humid hide and stuff. And so, well, if someone's got to have a humid hide, surely needs a humidity gradient and stuff. Like, and so like if it needs a humid hide to help it shed, then perhaps I need to actually start creating the humidity gradient. That's something I actually ended up doing. I hadn't thought about that until he presented those photos and stuff. I started doing that. I would no longer have a leopard gecko here at work, but that's what I've done then here at work. Was like, right, I'm going to have one side dry and arid and go through to a forested, more sort of forest-like sort of side enclosure and stuff, and give it areas to climb and stuff, which it did and stuff. And it was really fascinating to actually watch this one, leopard gecko that was well into its 20s, as far as we knew, suddenly displaying far new behaviours.
Yeah, and there's a couple important things in that as well to consider, because some people might set that up, then watch their behaviour, and then change it again when they see, oh well, they prefer, I don't know, when I'm watching it, it prefers the drier side in a humid hide. We shouldn't then start taking away parts of their husbandry because of what we've seen. The point is, the choice is there.
Yep.
We're not watching them 24/7. And then there's the problem. Humid hides are good. They totally fulfill a purpose. They do work.
Absolutely.
They absolutely work. But there is kind of a fallacy in their use, and that fallacy is these animals don't only go into hidden places like that to get humidity. If you check the humidity on the floor of an environment, you'll find that just off the ground, the humidity will be far higher. Yeah, and that's where that gecko is, standing when it's exploring its environment. That area is so much more humid than 10 inches higher.
Yep.
And so what they'll do is they'll go to more humid places, aren't necessarily hidden, and then they'll climb up to somewhere drier if they need to dry out. So while humid hides totally do a job, we can also set up enclosures without a dedicated humid hide, just by using those gradients you mentioned.
Yeah. And I mean, and also with humidity, I think a lot of time people will always forget that if they think, leopard gecko, and they, it's arid, or they subscribe to it's arid, almost think that arid means bone dry, and as you know, there is quite a bit of humidity sometimes in arid, even in deserts. There's humidity. There's certainly reports of people report walking, across the Namib Desert and getting soaked because of the fog.
Yeah, that was Francis' note. Yeah, absolutely.
And so that's humidity. That's a hell of a high humidity there. And I might have a big spike for a bit.
And until you've seen it, I have to give credit. It's hard to believe it until you've seen it. But when you've seen it, it changes the whole perspective. So like when myself and Sam Perrett went on that 2-week gallivant in the US, which was to our US conference, the only US conference we did, Rodeo, New Mexico, the Chiricahua Desert Museum. So we managed to go into the Mojave Desert and the Sonoran Desert, and all of the habitats between LA, the Mojave, Grand Canyon down to New Mexico, and then through the bottom of Arizona back through San Diego. So you can see that kind of big loop. And there's so much desert environment in there. We experienced hail. Not just rain. There was rain. There was dew. Dew that kind of condenses on all sorts of things in the environment, especially things like grasses and plants, and just rain and hail. We were driven across a track in kind of mid Arizona near New Mexico, and followed a striped skunk while it started, while a hailstorm started, and absolutely battered the car. And
hey, Sam, I was about to say, I'm guessing Sam's in the chat. Something about what HQ comes up with about the trip. Sam's the other half of Herp HQ.
Yeah, like you see in the chat, the trip changed his whole perception of southwestern state species. So if you started keeping a species from the southwestern United States, you see deserts. You've got the Sonoran Desert, Mojave Desert. You've got Death Valley down there, and everyone knows Death Valley is one of the hottest places in the world. And you take that in mind when you start formulating the husbandry of the animal you're keeping, and then apply it. You've just got an animal in a dry box, completely forgetting that those exact same places get what we just mentioned about dew, rainfall, and a lot of those environments as well. If you start digging down a few inches below that really dry substrate, moisture.
Yeah,
which is why a lot of those animals dig burrows. They'll dig deep burrows because they can go into them. Suddenly that humidity will, if you checked it on a monitor, will be spiking up to 80-90%, and they'll be sat in there quite happily, just like bearded dragons actually do in the wild environment as well. Yeah. as we learned from the conference.
As we heard, yeah. He comes from New Mexico. When he's in New Mexico, he says lives in the Sonoran Desert. Just what people really don't understand the Southwest in many cases.
Yeah, and that's just, I'd treat that as a case study. You can then apply that to deserts around the world and places that are considered.
Grace just got you up to 900 subscribers for Herp HQ YouTube.
8 legs 4 wheels. Thank you so much. 900, brilliant. Go towards that 1,000.
Gonna get it before me. So
we should make a race of it. We share each other's channels and make a race of it.
I'm on like 814, I think. So.
Brilliant. Or Yuma, yeah, we passed through Yuma. Exactly. It's the same there. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy. And then, like Sam said in the comments there, then you have Sedona. So the way the habitats go out there, and again, that goes for places all around the world, you just don't see it until you travel through so many different habitats. We went from dry, true desert in, just a few hours of driving through true desert to, scrub, where there's loads of creosote bush and such. And then suddenly you pass into grassland, woodland, and then really, really lush woodland with rivers and all sorts. And we went on a night herping trip in Sedona, as Sam said, and it did not feel like we were in the same place we was a few hours ago or a few hours later once we left. Yeah. It was lush. It was crazy. We were finding amphibians in wet habitat and all sorts, going along the river. And it's not just those water sources. They do wet the ecosystem around them, just like the Professor's Chris has just said. Small little wet ecosystems, yeah, and it affects the whole environment at least a bit. And some of those animals rely on that. So if we're not applying that in our captivity, you end up with dehydrated animals. And I have no doubts that a lot of captive herps are massively dehydrated, especially arid ones.
Yeah, that's a bit, and then sometimes they get dehydrated, and then impaction might happen, and then people go, "Oh, it's a substrate."
That's another fallacy. So looking at the wrong things. Robert Mendyke actually pointed that out in a really, really good way, didn't he? In one of his two talks, where you see the impaction happen, and then you point it at the substrate, but there's a missing step before, which is that your animal's dehydrated, that your animal's immune system has dropped, its digestive system has slowed down because it's stressed, it's dehydrated, it's unwell, and these things compound and cause an impaction. Now, if those things were solved, which is a normal part of husbandry, things that you should be upkeeping as an animal keeper, perfectly acceptable things to expect, then the sand ingested doesn't impact. Because they've got a working digestive system that can pass those substrates.
That's it. I mean, I've kept bearded dragon. I mean, I don't have any myself, but like my parents kept bearded dragons, for nearly 25 years. Always been on substrate. Not necessarily, again, back in the day, probably not the best mixes, just pure sand. But actually, as we learned, listening to the beardy vet, while they're on in the wild, caught sand.
Quartz sand, which is play sand. Play sand,
exactly. In 20, sort of nearly 25 years of keeping bearded dragons, never had a case of impaction from keeping them on substrate. And so,
the importance here is not having just a thin bit of dry substrate. That's a problem. You need to have deep substrate with moisture down below, which will naturally happen if you're, routinely spraying enclosures and stuff, providing water bowls, to give humidity, which will not kill them. Please, I promise you, beardy won't die from a water bowl.
No,
really well. And that goes for other species as well, uromastics and stuff. My God, just give them a water bowl. And then they're dehydrated on that little thin sliver of substrate, and then they're naturally gonna get impacted. If you weren't well, you can get impacted on all sorts of things. You can get impacted on fibrous, perfectly good food that's full of fiber. You can get impacted on that if your digestive system and immune system are reduced and that you're dehydrated. Again, another brilliant comment about that.
Absolutely.
Water is available every morning. Just like when it condenses in the morning.
And another one of side one is that it drinks dew off the skin in the morning. So it is. And the thing, that sort of does transfer to the invert side of things. I mean, like blue deafanium beetles. I keep blue deafanium beetles, and so many people think just keep them on bone dry sand and that's it. I'm like, no. They need moisture.
People for some reason consider arid animals for water to be dangerous for them, and it makes no sense at all. If anything, in terms of actual medical issues, you probably see more problems from wetter habitat species being kept too wet than arid species being kept too wet.
Oh, definitely.
Arid species can deal with that moisture because they will retreat to places and stay in that moisture for a long time. And then you've got things like semi-aquatic snakes and lizards, where if they're kept too wet and they can't dry out, that's when you end up with fungal and bacterial infections problems and things like scale rot and all those problems. It's not being able to escape the wet environment and go to a dry environment and dry out. Just like again how we see aquatic turtles, they'll swim around, they'll be wet for ages, and then they'll come out and bask and completely dry out. Their entire outside of their body, their shell will completely dry out and become really, really hot, and under strong UV. They'll go both ends of the spectrum on purpose because it keeps them healthy, keeps them well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think combined with that in captivity, historically, and even still a little bit see it today, we sometimes say, stuff needs to be high humidity, therefore I'm going to give it less ventilation. To keep humidity. And
Absolutely.
kind of forget ventilation is so important for that, whether it be reptile, amphibian, invert, and so just because it comes from a high humid environment, it needs even more ventilation because to prevent that stagnant air and
stagnant air is awful.
Yeah.
And that regards again things like fungal and bacterial growth, because they'll thrive in that environment. You're absolutely right. It's massive ventilation and then just keeping up with the moisture in the environment that then is lost. That's fine. It's your job as a pet keeper to go and keep that environment where it's meant to be. Just because I don't know, the humidity drops because of ventilation, deal with it and spray the enclosure a bit more rather than drop the ventilation and then end up with an animal with a respiratory infection, which is if we were kept in a humid box without ventilation, would happen too, which is why, exactly like I said then, if you're kept in a humid box, you'd end up with a respiratory infection. If you go to a humid country where you can be in a similar humidity but with the ventilation, you might struggle, but you won't have the same problems. And we can apply that to that's how we're keeping our animals. If you're not providing that ventilation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, certainly over the last few years, ventilation has been something that's been looked at more and more and more. People both in zoos and the hobby are starting to add things like fans on the enclosures to create that airflow and stuff. I'm certainly seeing that more. Certainly in zoos, I'm seeing that more. I'm starting to see that more and more, with some people within the hobby.
Through flow. So you're not just getting ventilation from one place. You've got a through flow of ventilation from one side of the enclosure to the other, so it can pass through naturally.
That's it.
Moves.
Yeah, and even looking at where we place our vents on our vivs. As Jamie Laura's Reptile Shed, he started talking about that on his channel. Of he's building his own vivs. Traditionally all our vents for our household vivs just go on the back. But then what do? We push that to the wall, which then there's no airflow there really. So what he started doing is putting his vents on the side of his vivs, and then doing some high and some low to again try and help create that flow of air.
Then you're working with how air moves when it's warmer and cooler. As it warms and cools, it will move around the enclosure. And like you say, then you've got the warm air rising going out of the higher up vents. And then as that goes out, that pulls in cooler air through the lower vent.
That's it.
That's physics.
That's
just how physics works.
It's something that traditionally hasn't really been thought about. So good, just gone.
Some people will have been doing this. Yeah, some people will have been doing this for years.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They either won't have spoken about it because they're just very private keepers, or they've spoken about it and been shut down.
Because it's something that's deemed new or different to what I do, and I don't want to hear it.
Money.
Yeah. And that's actually, hey Derek. Derek's Reptile Innovations. He's from the States, so and does a lot of he builds enclosures for people and stuff, and does sort of rehoming work and stuff. And he's very much sort of stateside trying to help him, get people to improve things and stuff, and go, well, look, how about a much bigger enclosure for things and stuff, and
Awesome.
and even showing how to build like your own vivs and stuff. But it's one of those things actually where sometimes a few of us start to compare like the reptile keeping hobby to the marine keeping hobby. Where the marine keeping hobby often, not always, but do you see a lot of them are willing to spend the money on equipment.
Hi, Derek.
Reptile keeping hobby, you do see a lot where, well, I'll buy this £100, £500 raw python, but I only want a £10 enclosure.
Yeah. Two weird sides of how to do things with animals. Yeah. This is a massive generalization, but if your animal costs way more than your enclosure, your end permanent enclosure did, you should probably rethink over it and just see if you have missed things out, because good enclosures frankly are expensive. Unless you're very, very, very good at DIY, and some people are, and manage to do things under a really good budget, which is totally doable. But most people aren't. Most people will be buying pre-built or flat pack, enclosures that cost a lot, and fitting them with all the brilliant new technology, which costs a lot of money, which is great. But if you're doing it like that, it should be expensive.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's even something that in zoos, a lot of zoos still need to learn as well as that. These animals do cost quite a bit of money to set up and to run.
And you should expect it. Too many people come into this hobby thinking they can enjoy animals and make money from it. Biggest mistake. You should come into it for the to keep the animals and expect to be out of pocket for it. Really, you're very lucky if that doesn't happen.
It's one of those things. If you're getting it to try and make money, you're going to fall out of love with it very quickly. As far as
not only that, your welfare standards are likely to
just going to drop. Yeah, that's it.
Which is something worth mentioning. With that is a lot of the keeping methods that Advancing has tried to tackle. Some of the examples being like basic rack keeping, where you've got just a tub and a water bowl and paper or something like that. That method actually was not how snakes and reptiles were originally kept.
No, it's quite new.
Absolutely not.
It's quite a new concept.
Yeah. So originally it was naturalistic keeping. As it became more industrial as an industry and hobby, for example, and this isn't a hit at morphs. I promise you, it's not a hit at morphs. It's just, unfortunately, it came about because it was intertwined with when morphs came about. Things like royals being bred in their thousands. Racks came in because it was cheaper, easier to keep those animals. That's when things like racks started being used. For decades and decades before that, it was trying to replicate the natural environment of those animals the best you could. Look at you saw it in Robert Mendyke's talk, some of the original ways people were keeping in Victorian times, which was mind-blowing. Massive boxes kept naturalistic, and then them trying to heat them with things like oil lamps and heated water. And
but then they used what they had at the time. They didn't have access to the halogen lamps and UV lights and stuff, but they tried to
replicate the natural environment they saw those animals in when they caught them.
Yeah, even down to the plants. I mean, we're massive on plant collecting and stuff, and so it'd be like, let's see the plants from that habitat and stuff. It was just like, that's getting a bit for some people that's a bit extreme, sort of thing. But that's the way they were doing it. And so it's only it's quite recent that racks are a thing.
Yeah, so minimalist keeping like that is more recent. It's a recent part that came from the industrialization of the industry, of the animal care industry. So I definitely get angry when people try to say otherwise, that that's how people originally kept these animals, why we have them in captivity. No, that's why we have millions of those animals in captivity. And sometimes I don't think we need millions of some of those animals in captivity. It very much gives me unmasked battery farming vibes. And these are strong opinions, but fortunately, we can back them up with welfare-related studies on things like muscle tone, skeletal system health and bone density, mental health, behavioral studies. Another problem that comes from that, which very much goes back to the leopard geckos and stuff, is when people go, okay, I'm going to try a big naturalistic enclosure with these gradients, and they'll pop their animal in there and they'll go, my animal's not doing anything, it's not using the environment, so I think you're wrong, you're telling me the wrong things. But consider, did your animal come from a minimalist keeping method originally? Did it start in a minimalist tub or something and spend its first, few months, maybe even a couple of years of its life like that? They will learn from their experiences, and they will learn that, that's all there is in life. You put them into the new environment, there is a chance that same animal will not know properly how to use that environment. That isn't a problem in the keeping method of naturalistic. It's a problem in the keeping method of minimalism that has not worked the plasticity of the brain of the animal in its early life. By keeping them like that for so long with no enrichment, nothing to think about, nothing to do, no complex environment, you are essentially making your animals less intelligent. And that's how it works. They've proven that's how it works in humans, feral children. They've proven that that's how it works in other mammals. They've proven that's how it works in birds. And now we're starting to also see it in herpetiles. Those learnt experiences early in life are super important, and minimalist en masse keeping will affect what the hobbyist sees out of their animals and their behaviors from their animals. So essentially, we need to just try better, and you'll start to see animals that use their environment more, that seem more intelligent, because there's a good chance they are.
That's it. Yeah. Hey, Courtney.
Sorry, I properly go on rants about this stuff.
No. It makes my job easier.
I bet.
I just sit and listen. But I think, that kind of leads on to what you're doing as part of Herp HQ, actually, with the videos that you started putting out. You put out 3 videos yourself, haven't you now?
Yeah.
There's a couple out there that Sam put out originally as well.
Yeah.
And so we started doing a series of videos on Herp HQ. I'll share the channel again, so hopefully people go over and check it out, because it's definitely well worth checking
So how that
out.
kind of works is it's more, Sam does some incredible projects of his own, and when he kind of just follows what he does with that, which he's got some incredible environmental control stuff going on.
I've been following his work, and that's just so mind blowing.
I frankly,
him on Animals at Home podcast, him talking about that, and it's like, bloody hell, this is intense.
I go and actually see it in person and have him explain it to me, and I'm going to be perfectly honest, I don't understand a good amount of it. So that's really impressive. And then what I do is I just want to educate the masses.
Yeah.
So we've got two interesting different things going on with that. I just want to point out the information that people don't tend to find or read, that go against the rhetoric that you hear across the hobby and industry, and put it in a really nice format. I'm hoping.
I mean, I can say I've thoroughly enjoyed the videos you've put out so far. The first one was on reptiles have emotions.
Yes, the emotions one.
Almost 9 o'clock.
Almost 9 o'clock.
Where it starts going a bit crazy sometimes. But reptiles having emotions. I've done the leopard gecko one, and then the latest one was about reptile eggs as well.
Which that latest one kind of actually ties into the emotions one more than you'd think before you watch it.
It really does. It really does. Certainly, those two are definitely ones I would definitely watch. Sort of thing, if you're not interested in leopard geckos, sort of thing. But...
And, like Sam said, blows his mind too, because I do those videos myself, and then Sam watches them once I've made them and goes, "Wow, that's a really good video." When they're posted. Here's one source I've got right next to me. I've put it in the end of the video. I recommend, if you want to learn about reptiles, social systems, how their brains work, this book is incredible, and it is new. This book is so new, it actually quotes the COVID-19 pandemic in the first few pages. So if you want new information regarding reptiles and how intelligent they can be, I highly recommend it. It's absolutely brilliant. I haven't finished the book myself, and I'm already mind blown. So it's definitely worth reading. So yeah, with the YouTube videos I'm making, I am going to make ones on all sorts of things, including general husbandry ones and species highlights and things. But to start off with, I'm definitely kind of erring towards making people think about the animals differently first. So, like you saw from the videos, the emotions one, I want people to be able to look at their animals and realize they're capable of a lot more than your first preconceptions, that they're able to learn and do a lot of complex behaviors. Then we can talk about husbandry.
Absolutely.
You're thinking about your animals actually as they can behave. And yeah, if anyone's got any questions in the comments and stuff, feel free. I will go into another rant if you come up with something.
Yeah, if anyone does have any questions at all, just put them in the chat. Say hi, Andy. Hey, Robbie. Hope that OBT pairing went well. So,
Most people 9 o'clock for questions.
Yeah, they'll start coming in. But I mean, with reptiles and intelligent, traditionally we have kind of, as a society, thought of reptiles as being unintelligent, which is wrong. And even in some of the terms we use, I mean, in the zoo world, some zoos refer now to reptiles as lower vertebrates, and stuff, which instantly makes you think, well, they can't be intelligent if they're lower. And so just some of our terminology around them. So when we know, well, those of us know they are intelligent, and that's one of the things you go into, how the brain's made up within reptiles.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right, especially in the lower vertebrates, and some brilliant places still refer to them as that, but maybe we'll see that change eventually. Maybe we should be referring to them as things like non-avian reptiles instead.
Or, as a collective, because a lot of zoos that still use that term and use that to describe the whole section. because they're like, oh, we don't want to call it reptiles because they've got amphibians in there as well, and
And
invertebrates.
they don't want to call it herptiles because nobody
don't
knows
call
what
it
that means.
But it's all like, just call it, to the public, call it reptiles because they don't know what LVI means. But within zoo prep, call it ectotherms at least, sort of stuff, in which at least covers most of those and stuff in a much nicer way.
And then you can put a big board explaining what that means.
Exactly, rather than these are lower stuff, which is, always seems a bit of a, I don't like.
Makes people walk in expecting to see dumb lizards. And frankly, when it comes to our preconceptions about how these animals work, we have to consider that it's that we like to see things similar to us as intelligent, things that aren't similar to us unintelligent. It's a human-centric way of thinking, and it's a really old study. It's already been well covered, all that stuff. But for example, it goes back to things like neoteny. So we find things that look like human babies, super cute, and we want to give them attention because they look like human babies. So if we have a lizard that's very expressive, expressive eyes, maybe it has behaviors that people can go, oh, it's angry, oh, it's happy, oh, it looks a bit sad. They will be able to go, oh, but that, there's some intelligence there. Then they look at a snake and go, it's telling me nothing. This snake is telling me nothing. It's clearly a dumb animatronic, beast. But then it gets mind blowing because snakes are actually relatively new evolutionarily. A lot of snake species can easily be described as evolutionarily more recent than most lizards.
Yep.
Which, if you think of it like that, then those snake species have had more developmental time to develop their brains and the behaviors they show. We should stop thinking about things by how they show us emotions, thoughts, and start actually judging them by their own individual species-centric aspects. So looking at what's important for the animal in their environment and see what puzzle working out what sort of level of thinking they can do in their environment. You find it with snakes; they actually do a hell of a lot of things, which are mind blowing. Like people think the snakes just move around their environment, find somewhere to hide, and that's it. But they can manipulate their environment. Snakes will move. Snakes can dig, for one, not just put their faces into things. They can use their body to move substrate around. They will use their body to move foliage so that they have a better, ambush position if they're an ambush animal. And then there's all the ways they deal with each other, social behaviors, everything. To some snakes will bring potential partners food. That's something we imagine things like birds doing, and we can easily see birds as intelligent.
That's it. Yeah. Birds are well known for doing things like that, and then we always think, well, reptiles would never do that. It's well documented. Some say it's documented in crocodilians. So, I think Growth of the World documented the American alligators, the male bringing food to offspring, and actively stopping the female from taking food from the offspring. So, and it's like, the dads are just as, the males, the sires are just as parental. So, which clearly, shows that they're fairly intelligent.
And crocodilians are quite actually far back evolutionarily.
Yeah.
So now you're talking about complex social behaviors in an animal that is actually considered quite archaic in terms of evolution, in terms of how soon they came up, how long they've had in change to get better in their environment. No, they've had those behaviors for a long time. People just don't see them when they see one in a zoo or walk, or drive past one in the wild.
No, that's it. I mean, you come to where I work, we've got 2 Cuvius dwarf caiman. Chances are you're not going to see him move.
Yeah. And frankly, you as a keeper probably don't see, half of it as well. And it's up to us to admit that.
Yeah, absolutely not. I'm not watching them 24/7. I may, if I'm lucky, I'll see them move because they're hungry and they've heard my voice, and they associate my voice with food, and they're straight there. Well, that's it. They've got that association that my voice, the sound of me, means there might be food. I'll go towards that sound, sort of thing. So in fact, plenty of zoos train their crocodilians, target train them, train them to have blood draws and stuff. You've got to have intelligence to be able to do that.
And those are things that zoos tend to shout about when they get their mammals to do them. Yeah. But absolutely, some places are getting their archaic reptile species to do it. So what's the difference?
Well, so if you can get Cuban crocs doing conscious blood draws. And so a lot of people would never think of all the crocs a Cuban croc. But you do that and do it to Mr. Ma and stuff. And it's not sort of shout about anywhere near as much. And some of it is it's not a cute, cuddly looking animal. Sort of thing.
It's not charismatic. You'll know that you'll know that word while working in a zoo. That good old charismatic megafauna and otherwise, which for the people that may never have heard of that, it's an aspect of thinking that the animals people like to see in a zoo, pandas, fluffy things, lions, tigers, elephants, giraffes, are the charismatic first thing you see and look for in a zoo. Thus they get the most attention and most money and most consideration as well when it comes to things like research. They will get the most people wanting to do big research projects on them because they are charismatic. Megafauna just meaning big animals. And then you've got all the other animals that people don't look at first, and thus they see them as lower, dumber, and they get less studies done on them. Then because we have less studies done on them, we know less about them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's something that we certainly have here. Obviously we utilise university students and stuff a lot to do studies, and so often we're turning them away because all they want to do is studies on, food preferences of lemurs or tigers and stuff. That's been done. It's been done so many times. It doesn't need to be, everyone knows it within zoos, but there's all this stuff that we don't know that we need research, and there's like, oh no, I'm not interested in that. And so, but that's the stuff we need to know.
Yeah,
and it's always the same thing. People want to study the big stuff, and don't want to study UV preference of, this odd little lizard or this snake, or or even like food preference of reptiles. And so, because it's a thing that came up actually at a zoo conference last year of the variety of food that we offer our snakes. And so, and that the fact most zoos we do just offer frozen rodents. And so, why is that kind of thing? Because no one's really studying, whether we should be offering variety like we do for everything else.
That is certainly that's something that we don't actually know in terms of data, but it's something we can point towards. For example, exactly what you're just saying, amphibian and fish-eating snake species. They prefer those in the wild. They're built in that niche to eat those animals, and then we move them onto rodent prey in captivity. But what about the problem where the rodents have a ton more fat in them than the amphibians or fish that they normally eat? Thus we could be ending up with snakes that don't live as long because they end up with fatty bodies, fatty liver disease, and all sorts of things like that, just because snakes can get all of the health conditions that other animals can get. we need to stop thinking that snakes don't get these things. They can get metabolic bone disease. They just don't show it because they don't hold their bodies up on legs. And their jaws don't actually have to take the same amount of pressure usually as lizards do. That is why they hide things like metabolic bone disease and things like that. And it's crazy. Looking at the comments and
a couple of questions. I'm going to do Jim's first. That's quite a quick one.
Top 5 reptiles that should be harder to get a hold of. Oh,
there's so many that we could choose. I'd say it's going to be a quick one, but there is so many. I mean, one that comes to mind, like top for me, bosk monitors.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I love bosks. My parents have a bosk. It's a rehome bosk. And so, a few people in the comments do have bosks. Now, I think everyone's got a rehome bosk and stuff. But I think everyone in chat that does have bosks probably agrees as well that they should probably be a hell of a lot harder to get hold of. So.
I would justify this around a different concept. From what I've seen and been frustrated about, I'd personally choose the animals that come in massive numbers in imports, but you find are difficult, if not impossible, to find captive bred, despite having been imported year on year or for decades. So the animals that have been, the species that have been in captivity for decades, but you can't get captive bred, or not often, maybe like 1 or 2 people doing it. That's frankly not enough to justify thousands of animals coming into captivity. So look at those, like Hertula, I always say that word, Hertula, the vine snakes, the Asian vine snakes. Oh my God, how many of those get imported into captivity every year? How many people do you actually know that have kept them for those single individuals for multiple years? And even less, how many people do you know have bred them? They have, but compare to the thousands and thousands of exported individuals that die. That's where I have a problem. Animals that are exported in their thousands, tens of thousands, and don't end up thriving in captivity because they end up being sold to anyone and everyone, not the people that are interested in getting them settled and adapted to captivity. If I was to choose something other than that whole concept, because there are lots of species we can talk about for that, lots of amphibians, those Ahitula, which are, mainly saurophagic snakes, lizard-eating snakes, which is a difficult one for people to provide. You've also got things like, I don't know if people know about Peter's banded skinks. That's one that gets me quite a bit. They're imported in tons and tons. But there's frankly, 1, maybe 2 people have shouted about having bred them before. And they've been in the industry for a long, long, long time.
Yeah, every single one I think every single one I've ever seen for sale, I've never kept them. I mean, they're awesome.
They're all wild caught.
There's just not enough info on them. And yeah, every single one I've ever seen for sale has been wild caught.
They're all wild caught. Yep.
And so it's all like, and that's, I've seen them for sale for over 20 years. Sort of thing.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
Yeah,
and then you look at it, how many people are breeding them? None. Then why are we still importing them? But because one person might do it right, doesn't kind of justify that enough. The welfare balance, it doesn't work out. The welfare is so low in that example that it's really not justified. And then we have the problems of the animal rights used against us for the mortality rates of reptiles. I'm sorry, but there are some problems there. Just like that. Other reason I might say top 5 reptiles that should be harder to get a hold of. Bigger ones. Big ones. Burmese pythons, reticulated pythons, African rock pythons, anaconda. And this isn't for safety. It's not because they're dangerous. It's not anything like that. I've got no problem with people keeping them in terms of that. It's for the animals themselves. The welfare of those big snakes that get huge. Very few people actually keep them well for an animal of their size. You get a mammal, you get a large mammal as a zoo or something, you're expected to give that animal a larger enclosure that meets its needs, not the enclosure of a small mammal. But when it comes to herpetoculture, we get massive snakes and we put them in enclosures we put medium-sized lizards in. And frankly,
and I don't know if you get, I mean, things like Red 6, not only do they get massively long, but in the wild, they're fairly arboreal.
Oh yeah. Speak to people that have actually seen them in the wild, and they will tell you that if they saw multiple reticulated pythons while out there, I guarantee more of them will have been found in trees than on the floor.
Yeah. Well, as I was trying to, some people that have been out to, Indonesia, they got the likes of Nathan who lives out there.
Nathan Rinkley, yeah.
Pretty much every single one they see is, potentially 40 foot up a tree.
Yeah. And as young ones,
on the ground.
Yeah, and as young ones, as neonates, that's their niche, is actually climbing that high. So, and then we're not doing that for those neonates. Again, we're keeping them, on average, normal, generalized, minimalistic.
Yeah, and that's something, that goes for zoos as well. Zoos are very much guilty of it, I think, as well. I mean, I've never kept retics either privately or professionally. Never kept a berm either, and so, but I do see it around a lot of zoos where they might give them a much larger enclosure than someone in the private hobby might, but they don't necessarily give them height and stuff. And so,
frankly, I take offense to the thought that hobby keepers shouldn't keep like some zoos aim to. No, you should, because you should have the same thought process of the people setting up the zoo enclosure for an animal, which is weighing up the welfare, the space for enrichment to climb and use all its physiology. You as a pet keeper should be considering these exact same things. And if you can't provide those things, you should not get that animal. Frankly, you should weigh these things up and tell yourself, I shouldn't get this animal. I would not get a reticulated python because I've got nowhere to put an enclosure big. I've got space to put an enclosure as big as people tend to keep them in, but not big enough to justify it, to give them what they actually would benefit from. So species like that, so bigger monitors as well, sometimes count on that when they get frivolously sold. Big snakes, I'm not saying they shouldn't be in captivity, but they certainly should be harder to get. I'm massive minefield, but at some points it's easy to consider, should we have licensing around those sorts of animals? But unfortunately it would be done human centric around safety of people, like the dangerous wild animal license, when what I'm talking about is the welfare of the animal, and I know that won't be considered the same. But I'm sure you can see where I'm coming from with that frustration.
Okay, so I would be, if it was done right, I'd be in favor of licensing for every animal. Stuff, but it would never be done right.
No.
Stuff.
No. It is that frustration. It wouldn't be handled right, but in the ideal world, it would save a lot of welfare problems.
That's it, and would also a whole base. Hope it wouldn't stop animal rights activists, but it would at least give us something to like, look, these are our standards. These are standards, across the board, but let's say, they don't get DWA necessarily right in terms of licensing, because every council does something differently to each other, and so and that's been around for many years.
But it's different aims for licensing as well. It kind of messed that up. when it comes to things like defending ourselves from animal rights, this next bit is not only my opinion, it's kind of like the consensus of advancing, because we've discussed this at length, which is the problem of animal rights. Yeah, they are a threat. They're a massive threat, as we've seen recently with Doncaster and things like that. But the way we go about fighting them, the hobby, in our opinion, has kind of done it dirty. We shouldn't just be shouting at them and saying, no, it's fine, what we're doing is fine, what we're doing, there's not actually problems, you're taking things out of context. The better way we find you can go about these things, and I've found that this way of thinking actually does get around people better. I'm exposed to hundreds of animal care students that have various opinions, and some of them do come through with animal rights like opinions, and we are able to change them by improving what we do with our animals wherever we can. Yep. By looking at what we do, actively pointing out the wrong things, the things that could be improved, and not convincing the public and the lawmakers that what we're doing is okay. No, we want to show them what we're doing is okay, is good. And the only way we can do that is by improving, constantly, always improving, always doing better, always looking up, changing things for the better, not just staying in the past. Because if we stay in the past and keep defending what we're doing, even the wrong things, frankly, the animal rights will eventually win.
Yeah, if you're not careful.
Yeah, if you're not careful. But the way we go about it really needs to be thought through. We need to... And again, the battle isn't actually to convince the animal rights. You won't change their opinion.
No,
it's the general public and the lawmakers we need to convince. And if the general public look at what we do and go, "Wow, I don't like the look of that. Wow, they haven't convinced me that what they're doing is good," then we're not going to win. But we can easily get around that by everyone self-policing, constantly looking at what we're doing and trying to do better. Yeah. And pointing out the bad things and saying, well, this is what we're going to do about it. This is what we're doing about it to make it better. And that's how we do it at work. That's how a lot of zoos do it as well.
Yeah, constantly having a look and going, right, we've got to this point. Now what can we do?
Yeah, what's next? What's next?
Within zoos, within bars, we do welfare assessments of all our animals.
Yep.
And we assess and, go, right, these are the things, okay, this is where we think needs to be improved. Right, well, how can we improve that? And then, and so, I mean, aim for that. We'll never get to that end point. We've always got to keep moving forwards, and keep going towards that thrival point. And every single time we move of it, we push that a bit back again because, we go, all right, well, now we can do this.
So that actually goes back to another of Robert Mendyke's things. You'll remember from the end of his talk, the endless continuum of welfare. Which is something he presented that at the US conference as well, which opened. Yeah, I already had the concept, but the way he put it in a visual format, I thought was absolutely brilliant. It's imagine an arrow going up to the corner. I could probably get it up in screen in a bit, and imagine that arrow never ends, and everything you add for welfare, starting with appropriate food, appropriate water, appropriate conditions. You're at the bottom of the arrow, moving up and up and up. And we keep adding new things as we learn new things, like enrichment, judging the mental health of the animals, thermoregulation, better ways of thinking about that, providing them better heat, better UV, full spectrum lighting, nutritional analysis. These things are going further and further up this arrow towards perfect, towards thriving, but we will never get there. And that's good. That's a good thing. We need to be constantly going up this arrow forever, always.
Yeah,
we should never consider that the welfare of our animals is done and perfect, because
it should constantly be evolving,
constantly getting better. Let's have a look at the comments.
So I'm just going to put up one of these ones actually from a while ago, because this is stuff and actually I think a lot of people do get confused with sometimes, but often is I always struggle saying the words as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of those words that
yeah. I find I'm okay at saying these only because I have to say them so many times a day with the students. But if we didn't, God, they're so difficult, some of these words.
It is.
Yeah, anthropomorphism. So, anthropomorphism is a big problem, but more and more I'm thinking that another thing is a bigger problem. So anthropomorphism is, as with the name, anthro meaning human, pomorphism, like, becoming human. It's treating an animal as having human aspects. So, when you look online, you find people setting up leopard geckos and bearded dragons with cushions and blankets and cuddling them. And, one big example at the conference was, a woman's bearded dragon that laid eggs on her, and she thought, oh, brilliant, this lizard trusts me enough to lay eggs, when the truth is actually that lizard's really stressed and couldn't find a place to lay the eggs, and is had no other choice but to lay them. Anthropomorphism is extremely dangerous to welfare, and it tends to come from newer, less experienced parts of the hobby. New keepers, it can't be helped. They come from keeping cats and dogs and all sorts of things like that, and they want a cute pet. They can't help it. It's they've grown with those experiences, but it lowers the welfare of those animals. And it is a problem, and we should, rather than get angry at it, we should teach carefully. Otherwise, people will get angry and forever hold on to that anthropomorphism. But one of the, and this is something that a few people have pointed out. Francis Casciri, I remember, was one of the people that started using the word much more. Mechanomorphism bothers me more now than anthropomorphism. Yes, so anthropomorphism can actually be useful when you use it as a form called critical anthropomorphism.
Yeah,
which you'll have learned at the conference. From Christy. Which is where we're using anthropomorphism to actually consider that these animals do have emotions, and then that we can consider their mental health, their mental state, and actually improve their welfare from that, rather than cuddling them and things like that. That's not what we're talking about. Then mechanomorphism is the opposite end of the spectrum, and rather than new keepers and less experienced keepers, which are usually the guilty ones for anthropomorphism, mechanomorphism is something that the industry does to itself. It's where we look at these animals again, like I've already said earlier, and see them as robots, automatons that have prescripted behaviors, and that's all they are. That they're essentially, if anyone does IT and coding, that they work along a code and they don't work outside of that. That's mechanomorphism. So that we can put their entire behavior and welfare on a spreadsheet and it can be complete. And they only do these behaviors because of this, which is where we see from, again, minimalistic keeping. They'll say, no, these animals just want safety, food, moisture, and that's it, and heat, in the circumstances. That's mechanomorphism, saying they need these only listed things, and that's all they need because they're simple creatures.
Yep. I mean, we could say about that's all we need, but we'd be extremely bored.
Extremely bored, yeah. So you're treating them as a robot, something like that, when actually they have experiences that they build their behaviors around. And we're talking about all known taxa, all known kinds of herptile. Even amphibians learn and change their behaviors over what they've learned across their lives. They can make associations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and learn. And can do lots of surprising things with that. So they're not robots. We can't put them on a spreadsheet like that. And I find that way of thinking about these animals, that they don't need higher considerations because they're simple, is actually more dangerous to the industry from the inside out, because then we're teaching other people to think about the animals like that. And then you get more and more minimalistic keeping, which it's one thing for the industry to do that. That's one thing. What about when we see minimalistic keeping, for example, in pet keepers? People with 1, 2, 3, maybe let's say less than 10 snakes or something like that, are keeping these snakes in those minimalistic industry enclosures. That comes from mechanomorphism, that their pets are simple, robotic, don't need more. But those are pets. You should be providing them everything you can to live full lives. You have that responsibility.
That means get some partners then.
Huh?
That means I need to get them some partners then.
Yeah.
In the area.
That's actually, that is important as well. Reproductive behaviors. There's a massive part in this book about the reproductive behaviors of reptiles, and it is
We'll find a partner soon. I was talking to the ball python. I told her we'll get it a partner soon.
You get a partner. Brilliant.
Hey Moon, hey Amy.
But funnily enough, on that, we do cohabitate royal pythons at work. Have done for a long, long time.
There's nothing wrong with a little cohabitation or role play.
But that's something that you ask, certain people, and you'll be shot down for it. So
in certain echo chambers.
I've cohabited royals, I've cohabited corns. I know I've got a friend who's cohabiting royals. His royals are in a 5 foot long by 3 foot deep by 6 foot tall enclosure.
Oh, 6 foot tall. That's nice.
Yeah.
Like
he's on a arboreal enclosure for his royals. He's also got some of my captive bred millipedes in with him.
Yeah, cool.
So I'm here to go up to see it myself, but it's on I'll send you a video. I'll send you a link to one of his videos on it because it's quite substantial and somebody says look, they climb stuff.
Yeah. And they will, we have two royal pythons together at work. They're in a 6 foot long, 3 foot deep, 2 foot tall. Could be taller. I'd absolutely love it taller. It's just we didn't actually have the space in that area. But still, 6 foot long, 3 foot deep, 2 foot tall, with full halogen, full spectrum lighting, so UV and LED lighting. And my God, they are thriving.
Yeah.
They use the whole enclosure, and then we'll hide together. And let's be careful here. I am not saying they're hiding together because they love each other and want to cuddle, but studies have shown, and people out in Africa have shown, that when they find royal pythons, they tend, not always, but they tend to find groups hiding together. And it makes sense evolutionarily. That's behaviorally. That's one way of staying safe, is keeping conspecifics other animals nearby. There's multiple of you to fight a predator.
Well, that's it. And we say that about so many animals, safety in numbers. And it's we think about so many animals, but we hardly ever think about that about reptiles.
Yeah.
Was it? Hey, Humidity, how you doing? So,
Well, some interesting. So, what ratio would you have royals? Great question. So, this one's definitely just going to be opinion oriented. So, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm right. Personally, I'd keep single sex groups if you're just a pet keeper, but in larger collections, if you have the space to provide a large enough enclosure, a mixed sex group can actually work nicely, because then you can allow the animals within their own space and choice, because you're providing them enough space and ability to show all their behaviors to have choice. They can choose when to breed. That doesn't necessarily mean you should, incubate and hatch those eggs, but allowing them to show, reproductive behavior is not a bad thing. It can actually be a positive. This is something zoos are actually bringing up, that we should be allowing our animals to breed more often, even if we're not keeping the young, breed and cull. And it's really important. So that can be actually a welfare plus, allowing your animals to breed, but not necessarily keeping the eggs. We used to have the royals as a trio, boy and two girls. And they did great like that. We actually rehomed one just because we didn't need three. We rehomed the male. But when we got eggs from them, I just fed those eggs to something else.
Yep. I do the same with the caimans here. So I got Cuvius dwarf caiman. There's no need for us to hatch out any Cuvius dwarf caiman within the zoo. No one's going to want them. We don't have the facilities or anything, and it'd just be selfish of us to hatch them out just to go, look, we've got cute baby caimans. So, and actually, I say this when I do a talk on the caimans, but I allow them to, they live together, they go through the breeding cycle, she'll nest, she'll lay eggs.
Yep.
We go in there, take the eggs out, and we give them to the quieties often.
Yeah. And they bloody love it, don't they?
Oh, they absolutely love it. So, apparently, I've been told by one of my colleagues a caiman egg inside is very similar to chimp sperm stuff in texture. So it's very jelly-like. It's quite an unusual egg, actually. If you crack open a caiman egg, at least ours are. Maybe I can only go by our ones, but the yolk is it's kind of grey. It's really odd.
That is odd. I mean, I'm going to be honest. Crocodilians are a massively weak part for me.
So
I don't know
it's
about
kind of
that.
grey. It's pretty much all yolk, hardly any white and stuff. And yeah, it's all a bit odd.
Okay,
but certainly, with reptiles here, because breed cull policies, I think across that, certainly in the Netherlands, utilised quite a lot. And stuff, but they're very controversial as well, especially when you get into mammals and stuff. And animal rights love to sort of hit on about stuff like that often. I find.
Fortunately,
but with a lot of, at least if they're oviparous reptiles, and you go, well, they're in the egg and get them straight away. There's no embryo. Sort of thing.
So breed and cull is so easy with oviparous species. You're absolutely right. And frankly, that's where I see that's fine. You can let your animals breed as long as they're not being forced to breed too often. That is something I pointed out in the latest video. In Southern African pythons will actually go multiple years not breeding after having a clutch, because that single clutch they will put up to 40% of their actual body weight and condition into. They will lose that much condition and then spend multiple years not breeding. So you do have to consider it species by species, but some do naturally breed every year or throughout the year. And it can be a positive to allow them to do that, especially if the animals you're keeping, for example, if you keep some rarer species, it can be beneficial to keep them breeding even if you haven't got space for the offspring and cull, get rid of the eggs until you do have space, because otherwise animals not breeding can end up losing their ability to keep all that breeding behavior, especially generation on generation.
yeah, as they get old and stuff. Yeah.
I tried cohabbing during mating season. The females fought. What do we mean by fought, though? Genuinely, were they pushing each other around? Were they striking each other? Because that's a weird one. That could come from like the environment more than them. So snakes and things do have territories, and females will have territories. So you could have one female snake feeling stressed because it needs to nest. It's got a push to find a nesting place, but it is forced next to another snake. It can't find another good place to nest in that environment. So that could be something to consider. So I don't know if that is exactly it. It's just what's coming up in mind. I don't know your situation.
I think there's so many variables. And certainly cohabbing is not for everyone. And so I mean, we've got to sort of stress that cohabbing it's not for everyone. And so we need, and we always got to have that backup plan as well.
Oh yeah,
always, have an option of we can separate if we absolutely need to.
Which is another thing that the pet keepers and zoological institutions tend to have differently as well. A pet keeper doesn't tend to have space put aside to separate up things like that. These, again, generalization, some might do, but I guarantee a lot won't. They'll just have the number of enclosures they've got, and they'll have them all filled.
Empty tank syndrome.
Huh?
Empty tank syndrome.
Yeah, empty tank syndrome. Whereas, zoological collections will have places to put those animals if they need to separate them. We've got an entire quarantine room full of empty enclosures ready not only for new stock or ill stock, but we can also separate any animal we have to into there.
Yeah.
Enclosures ready for that animal.
I mean, and that concept, for me, that goes across so many animal keeping hobbies, whether that be reptile, whether that be invertebrate, whether that be amphibian, fish as well, and stuff. Perhaps less so in invertebrate because we all, if we've got anyone with any size invert collection, we've normally got some kind of plastic tub that can be an enclosure very quickly on hand.
Definitely,
so definitely less so in terms of invert, but certainly when it comes to reptile, amphibian, fish and stuff, it's like how many people do have a spare one. In terms of fish, how many people have a spare aquarium running with no fish in it, stuff, just in case or whatever. In a pet scenario, perhaps you're not likely to have that, and at the end of the space is a premium. Often, perhaps you don't have the space for that and stuff. It's always sort of. There's not necessarily an easy answer to it. Dee's very very young as his rattlesnakes. He loves his rattlesnakes.
Artificial den, several animals in enclosure that have individuality. Yeah. So as long as your enclosure is big enough and you're offering those places to nest separately if they want to, that can work. And again, we need to consider this species to species as well, individually, because in that example, rattlesnakes are actually extremely social snakes. Extremely social. They will nest together. You can have multiple females in a nest with a single male defending the entrance. That's one observation that's actually made in this book, I believe, where a male rattlesnake was found specifically defending two nesting females that were nesting quite happily together, and they will deal with each other quite happily because it helps their reproductive survival. Actually, a lot of reptiles will rely on living around others of their own species and breeding close to them to help the numbers game of survival of their babies.
Yeah. Hey, Steve.
Hello, everyone. there's any new people.
Thought I'd just say, Beans, I've been so quiet. I've just farted.
I did it ages ago, Mark.
Just checking through comments. I'm a bit behind on the comments.
Yeah, bigger enclosures, and yeah, if animals breed, just please, if you take that advice, I'm not encouraging people to breed their animals for the sake of breeding them. That advice is entirely around getting rid of those eggs after breeding, not hatching them out. Like you say, feeding them to something. Oh God, some reptiles absolutely love reptile eggs.
I think it's a good resource, you know.
It is.
You know, and it's that thing, as long as you're not doing it, intensively and stuff, and it's all just part of just the natural cycle of that animal.
Within reason, yeah.
It's a really good resource for a lot of things, you know. Again, you know, so we've got a female sulcata here, you know, mostly she'll lay a couple of clutches of eggs. Again, don't need baby sulcatas. So again, they get fed out to stuff. It's a resource.
Yep. So we've got. So we used to have the royal pythons as a male and 2 females. Now it's just 2 females. We do have 2 corn snakes live together as a pair, and when we get eggs off them, again I feed them to things. Tell you what, if you feed a corn snake egg to a Californian king snake or a milk snake, they go ballistic. Absolutely ballistic. They love snake eggs. Or reptile eggs.
Yeah.
They're perfect for them. The king snake could have eaten the whole clutch if I'd let it.
I mean, and that's something that's, you know, perhaps not thought about, because again, you know, king snakes will eat snakes. And stuff. You know, we forget about that often in captivity. And stuff like a Cali king or Mexican black king or whatever, you know, in the wild, they do feed on snakes and probably would eat their eggs and stuff, but you know, again, you know, as to the amount of corns bred, you know, you could easily just, you know, have a few eggs that are fed out to stuff. The nutrition from that, you know, you'd get would probably be immense and be a real boost compared to just being fed a mouse once a week.
I saw that fairly social on the guards, which is that's amazing.
ASS.
See that's brilliant. Just a note like that is crazy.
ISS.
Does the King's Cup seem mad for juvenile rats? I was like, they do. Yeah, they're professional rattlesnake eaters. Absolutely. But yeah, that note about the guards switching out, you know, another addition on top of what I said. That's amazing. That's incredible. And you know, how easy is it to look at rattlesnakes and think that they're simple creatures? It's so easy.
Think through again, they've us in turn. I mean, the fact that you know, they've evolved to have a rattle that they can then warn animals that they're there. Well, that's intelligence.
Not only that, we've got paternal and maternal care. We've got neonates that stay. I know I used I used Python natalensis as the example in my last video for maternal care after having hatched. But rattlesnakes do it as well. The neonates will actually stay around the parents or the female at least for a decent while. And there are some amazing observations where they'll stay there. And again, back to you could go on for hours about things like this. Back to moisture in deserts. You know, when it rains, a little bit of rain, those rattlesnakes will curl themselves into a bowl and collect that rain and drink it off their body. They'll do it straight away as neonates. It's amazing. Any other questions?
Anyone in chat got any questions for Ricky in terms of advancing herpetological husbandry, Herp HQ,
or anything really. I'll just
or
chat.
anything reptile related. You work. Your day job is as a animal technician, isn't it, at a UK college?
Mm-hmm.
You said you got a fairly decent reptile collection there.
Yep.
Various things. I'm
I'm
guessing you're going to have all the common stuff that they're likely to see in any trade that they're going to go into. When I was at college, you're going to have the raw pythons, the leopard geckos, bearded dragons. But sometimes some colleges do have obscure things. Sometimes I know when I was at college we had night lizards, so which don't see very often. I know. It's shame they didn't know anything about them, but we had night lizards. I think the college I went to, years after they look back and go, "My God, they did not know what they were doing."
Yeah, a lot of the times it depends on the people working there. The people that have been employed, and it's not always their fault. Sometimes they're forced to stock animals to meet the curriculum, but animals they're not experienced or qualified to deal with, which is a shame. It happens. It is something we're actively trying to improve in the industry. In fact, I've been helping many colleges with training. We are running workshops for other colleges to come to and do. We're actually running a Herpetile husbandry workshop at Shuttleworth College, organised by our college but hosted at Shuttleworth, where essentially our aim is just college technicians to come and learn and do better. So we are trying to fix those things. But with the range of species, you're absolutely right. We'll have all the common stuff. So we'll have we've got corn snakes, royals, leopard geckos, bearded dragons. In fact, we've recently changed. We no longer keep Viticeps. We have Henry Lawson eye, so we have Rankins or dwarf bearded dragons instead.
Oh, nice.
So we can maximize space and welfare rather than just jamming in the next rescue bearded dragon we get. So we do try to think about that. But our aim, when it comes to the curriculum, we just have to tick boxes. And that is the students can deal with a certain number of taxa. That might stipulate a herptile, a bird, a mammal, and that's how it's done. But the way we see it is, especially within the technician team, is if a student is coming through our facility, they might see a species and go and be pushed forward just by experiencing that one weird, interesting animal, and be, they'll see that animal and go, "Wow, I want to work with that. I'm going to go into, I'm now going to after college go to university and do herpetology," and then they start their career that way, just because they saw that one interesting animal, and that's why we try and stock a massive range. So I mean, if I look down our list now. So we've got 21 species of amphibian, over 30 species of reptile, which we absolutely don't need for the curriculum, but we push to have it anyway, and we try to keep them all in good conditions rather than basic. So our students are coming through a place and experiencing maybe zoo style keeping, and we will tell them, you should aim for this. You should look at this and try and do better than us. This isn't perfect. Do better. So I mean, I'll go down the list and try and point out some interesting species. So amphibian wise, we've got false tomato frogs, bird poo frogs, Theliderma, Borneo-eared frogs, blue Azaraeus, the blue dart frogs, Chinese flame frogs, cinnamon frogs, budget's frog. We have a group of golden mantella that really exciting. We're actually increasing the group massively from stock from Chester Zoo soon.
I would say the ones I was after, probably.
yeah. Me just grabbing Gerardo and being like, "Give me animals, please."
There's a waiting list now. I was like,
Crown tree frogs, so Triprion, bumblebee toads, Melanophreniskis, Bombina, five-bellied toads, five-bellied newts, cane toads, five-bellied newts and toads. Yes, I think I've said that. Californian climbing salamanders are quite exciting.
Nice.
I'm quite excited having them. So Anides, we've actually got an unrelated 3 of those. So once they come of age, I'm quite excited to breed them, and we do try and breed some rare animals. So somebody's bored. Well, so while we try and control the breeding of common species, we don't breed them because we can, but we are interested in breeding rarer stuff like the bumblebee toads, the Crown's tree frogs. We are breeding. We have young from, and we then supply them just like zoos do. We supply them for free to other colleges and zoos. We don't sell them. They're not for money.
Yeah, but the thing is, doing that, colleges are like the perfect position to do stuff like that. That can be part of, I think, as mentioned at the conference, of wider conservation, where obviously in zoos often we want things on display, and zoo directors don't necessarily want things that don't display very well, but they may be critically endangered and stuff. But actually, if you have things, in the case where we don't necessarily have to actually display, it doesn't have to be on display 24/7, kind of thing, and stuff. But we can breed it as part of the programs and stuff, and and help zoos in the information. Zoos help you with the information and stuff, and that whole information exchange with each other.
The only there's a big difference actually. I've got to mention between us, how we run as a college collection versus zoos. Is zoos do tend to have off-show exhibits, so they'll have a lot of animals off-show usually, and that's where they tend to do the main breeding projects and things like that. Is an off-show enclosures, and they'll have usually, it's not always, but they'll usually have the non-breeding viewing animals actually on exhibit. Whereas at the college, absolutely everything is on show. The only stuff that isn't constantly in view is our quarantine room, and we still open that up for people to see. Everything else is straight as you see it. We don't have any behind-the-scenes facilities that the students don't see, so they come in and see absolutely everything we do. And all of our enclosures at once, which is pretty cool. Going on to Chelonia, so we've got Reeves turtle, we've got leopard tortoises, Bell's hingeback tortoise. We've just got a couple Annam leaf turtles, which is really, really exciting. So we're quite happy about that. Lots of mammals, so we do the mammal side as well. I don't know how interested people are in them as well. So we've got things like tenrec. We have a cuscus, if anyone knows what a cuscus is. That's like a ground cuscus is kind of our mascot. Ainsley.
Not many zoos have cuscus, let alone, they have one in the college. That's pretty cool.
Not only that, people look down on colleges often in the industry and don't realize that some of them actually do some really cool stuff behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah.
Our cuscus was actually bred by Hadlow College.
Oh, yeah.
So there are multiple in college collections, and that's really nice. So that's our brilliant one. Loads of rodents, blah blah. I'm basically going down our animal inventory list as I go. Egyptian jerboa, so that's cool. We actually have a captive bred jerboa. Sugar gliders, blah 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 blah. Get back to the reptiles at some point. And right, so snake-wise, we've got our boa constrictor. So of course we've got one of them, which again, I often think that those are too big for a lot of keepers as well. You don't see boa constrictors being kept very great. Oh, that's my boss.
Oh, was that your boss?
That's my boss. That's awkward. Hi, Joe. Yeah. Yeah, so snake-wise, we've also got a Grabowski's beauty snake is quite a cool one we got, but we've also got things like Western hognose, California king snake, Mexican milk snake, Bredl's python, Sarong green tree python, as well as our corns, our royals, sand boas. So basically, we're trying to get the students to be able to experience the widest range of taxa by their different like body forms and behaviors. So they'll see all these different animals, they'll see all these different species of snake, and realize that a corn snake isn't what all snakes are like, and a boa or a python isn't what all snakes are like. And suddenly their minds are opened up to, you know, their intelligence, evolutionary, crazy stuff. So lizard-wise, leopard geckos, like I said. We've got an eyed lizard, Cuban night owl, blue-tongued skink, fat-tailed gecko, Schneider's skink, Uromastics, Moroccan Uromastics, long-tailed lizards, bib bronze gecko, zebra skinks, Standing's day geckos, Sudan-plated lizards, crested and gargoyle geckos, Aki monitors. Again, we have the Henry Lawsoni rather than Viticeps for beardies. We recently, as well, back onto the Chelonia, we now have pancake tortoises. We've got 2 pancake tortoises, which is really nice that we're getting into EEP species as a college collection. So now we can have EEP species and show that work to the students rather than just rely on the theory side of work for them.
So, just had a request, so I'll do this quickly. Ellie, they want you to do it full screen.
Again?
Yeah, come on.
Oh,
And then we'll go on to AH Converter Man's question, because that's quite a good one.
That is a good question.
And then full.
So we'll do Ellie can just quickly full screen and then
Oh, I love it.
Okay, so that question was: so do the students have opportunity to access outside their normal course time if they're super interested? Absolutely right. Yep. So they can. Yep. So if students come down and ask to look around, if they ask nicely, we are more than happy for the students to look around, and they do. And then if they point out that there are areas that they feel they haven't met, both experience-wise, or maybe they just want more experience with something they're really interested in, we do try to make time for that, not just in their lessons. So they can come down and do that. They can ask their tutors to ask us as well, and we can make time for that. The animal unit isn't just for the lessons, it's just that the lessons take priority. So as well, outside of the lessons, we have students doing their projects, so investigative project, where they essentially do their own studies. As long as we know where they are, they essentially have free access to the animal unit to allow them to do that. So as long as we're okay with it, they essentially can do what they like with our watch over it.
Yeah, with your guidance and your your approval and stuff. Yeah. I mean, that's very similar here where we get we get a lot of students that come here and that do, especially university students that do long-term placement programs here and stuff, where we essentially train them to be a zookeeper.
Yeah,
and so if we deem them good enough, we give them key access, which gives them access to the locks of a lot of enclosures. So
that's cool.
And also, the more interested they are in something, the more the more they put into it, the more they get out of it. And so, and the more, they ask the right questions, the more likely they are to get taught certain things, whether it be in terms of, sometimes I do get people that come onto my section, which is the reptiles and the inverts and stuff, where they sometimes come into it not necessarily interested in them. And then I'm like, well, my job is to get them interested in these animals and hope that they, at least when they leave my section, it's normally after a month or 2 months, that hopefully there's a bit of an interest into those now, to the point where I've had a long-term placement who, drew up a training program for the rhino iguana. So, and I was like, fantastic, there's your project. And then, so they then get invested in, that animal and that species and stuff.
Frankly, when a student gets interested in an animal, that should be nurtured.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, because what they learn from that can so easily be transferred to so many other species. And so, another one who, she took on my pygmy marmosets within my tropical house, so instigated a training program with those guys, does all their weighing and stuff, and they almost, we have to be careful that they don't sort of get too much sense of ownership over them and stuff. And sometimes I have to remind sometimes some students of like, these aren't your animals, they're not just for you to work with, everyone else has to work with them as well and stuff. But that it really pushes them to actually do even more when they go, oh, I'm doing this and this is happening, and this is getting there, and stuff. Well, that's going to get you the experience as well. Stuff. I'm at Shepperth Wildlife Park near Cambridge.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so they need to be nurtured. So if a student wants to do more with an animal, we do allow it, and there is a bit of a divide between how it works between the curriculum and us as technicians. So technicians and zookeepers, your job is to take care of these animals and to teach about those animals. Whether it's teaching the general public or students, it's no different really at the end of the day. The curriculum wants to tick boxes. What we as technicians want is zookeepers ready to work with these animals. And we actually have been doing that with some of the groups where we've been leading quite heavily, is we've told those students, our aim is not to tick the boxes and get your assignments done. That needs to happen anyway in the background. What we want from you is we want you to be able to run this animal unit if we weren't there.
Yep.
We want you to be able to keep all of these animals and our 4 sections tip-top welfare, just like we do, without us there. You need to do what we do and behave like, we behave with the constantly doing better and better. We need to nurture you as actual people working in the industry, not just with these tick boxes, and that is our aim. We want to make good keepers out of these people.
Absolutely. So, I'll have a look at the chat.
And colleges have kind of had a bad rep in the industry, especially when it comes to herpetiles, and there have been problems, but you have to consider, like I said before, whether the people that work in the colleges have actually been experienced with those taxa. They're being forced to work. Yeah. They're not employing people that actually are well experienced with those animals and that area. And also that focus on curriculum over actual experience. So there are those problems, but the college industry is trying to do better. and it absolutely shows in the background.
Well, that goes almost for every industry. It goes for zoos as well.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, yeah, when I was studying at college, yeah, when I got to my second year, I could then study reptiles. By that point, the actual person who was sort of the reptile person had been sacked, and there was no reptile person working at the college that I was at.
Now imagine
And
how
so
stressful and horrible that is for the staff left over.
as it, that person who done all the reptile lectures also, it was the lectures and also like the practical sessions was the reptiles and the aquatics, and I took both of those, both those subjects for exotics and aquatics, and literally, then because our lecturers and technicians were sort of the same people.
Yeah,
and so
you do get that.
And I was just like, first I don't know anything about reptiles or aquatics, so I'm like, great.
Right.
Sort of thing. You're gonna, in practical sessions, like, I don't know anything about snakes, but I'm going to teach you how to hook a snake. I'm like, hang on.
Yeah, that is concerning when people are being taught directly quite complex things by people that don't actually know how to do it themselves. That's totally an issue. Absolutely.
Yeah, and
but it takes those people just need to seek training, CPD, which is something they do have to do, and there is more and more access. For example, college technicians are actually do actually make up a lot of the membership of ABWAC, and do go to the workshops and conferences for that.
For people who don't know what ABWAC is, it's the Association of British and Irish Wild Animal Keepers. So,
it's a membership-based organisation that, the zookeepers, basically professional animal keepers who do it as a day job, have membership for, and it provides training, articles, and other things, including grants and stuff as well.
Yep, exactly. And and even within Biasa, when you go to things like Reptile and the Amphibian Working Group or Terrestrial Invertebrate Working Group, we do have college people as part of the steering committees nowadays as well. Stuff, people from Sparshot or BCA or Recife and stuff, or Asking Brian and stuff. They're all Biasa members.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, actually the chair of the Terrestrial Invertebrate Working Group is currently the wildlife park manager of Asking Brian College.
There you go. Yeah, you do get some really serious people in these positions.
She is our chair, and I do see actually a lot of zookeepers that transfer from zoo to becoming college technicians.
Yep.
And vice versa, and go between the two.
Yeah, Joe Cook, you saw my boss. That's actually he's an example of that. He actually started in zoos and moved onto the college side later on. I'm not an example of that. I went straight from being a student into technician keeping, but that more came from my experience in the hobby in the background. That got me there from that, rather than actual work experience. What makes me about to be talks was how. Yeah. I love the animals in the Southwest. They're brilliant. I love it. I really want to get back out there.
For our American US viewers, is there any plans with AHH to do another US conference?
Nothing set in stone, but there is certainly interest. Yeah. We want to do more conferences, and we want to do a US one more. We need the demand. So, one, we need the demand and support. We need sponsorship. The conferences actually can't run without quite heavy sponsorship. And where we host it has to be it's a weird one. They have to be really generous. Drayton Manor, for example, has been extremely generous in how much it's costed us to run these conferences, and have basically held our hands along the way. And the amount it's helped is incredible, because we aren't pumping money into this. The money for the tickets is entirely paying for this. Other than that, it's sponsors.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of background money to run this stuff. For the US one, it was the Chiricahua Desert Museum that actually helped us massively. It's where we hosted it, and again, they footed so much of the cost and helped us through it. So it's the difference between that and us. You know, we couldn't actually afford to book out a massive venue for 2 days to fill that space. It wouldn't be able to. We don't have that kind of money. So it takes the help of a lot of people to do it.
Well, I think you mentioned actually on Dylan's Animals at Home podcast that all the admins of Advancing Herpetological Culture, you all buy your own tickets to the conferences. You're not.
Yeah, I squinted myself. Yeah, I properly squinted myself out. Yeah. Yeah, we all pay for our own tickets, including if our partners attend, which my partner did, and we paid for both of our tickets, even though we didn't have one of the seats because I was running around in the background. But yeah, that's how it is. We want these things to succeed and do well, so we'll put our own money into it if we have to. And yeah, we've always paid for our own tickets.
Yeah, I definitely get that. So, I mean, sometimes. Going back to the conferences, I think anyone who does keep reptiles, I would certainly say try and get to an AHH conference. If you're in the UK, it's at Drayton Manor. Hopefully, it'll be at Drayton Manor for many years. Hopefully, because it's like a perfect venue for it. Really,
it's central.
It's
central. They've treated us so well. Chris Mitchell, the zoo manager, is an absolute brilliant person. He bends over backwards to get it all working, and it just works extremely well. So, but however, the American ones, we're actually quite keen on if we do more, quite keen on moving them around to different places. So we did the Chiricahua Desert Museum just in New Mexico, just over the border from Arizona. But we'd quite like to move around America. But the idea is, because we'd have to go out that far, we want other opportunities like herping.
Yeah,
we want it to be near places where there's some brilliant herping, so we can spend a ton of money to go out there. For example, with the US conference we did, again, we all footed our own costs to go out there. The only people whose costs do get covered, if needed, are the speakers. They're the only people that get costs covered.
It's because I'm normal, yeah.
Like Amy.
So what was that question? We have just started on the counters. Yeah, if you're doing animal encounters, that's a brilliant thing to have. Even though people see courses as a reason. People see courses as a way just to get jobs, but a course can also give you the foundation of information and kind of give you what you need to teach other people. Because if you're doing animal encounters, you are responsible for teaching the people in the encounters. So yeah, it's certainly a good thing to do.
Yeah. Well, again, that goes as part of your CPD. Turns out as part of doing encounters, I'm pretty sure it's in the animal activities licensing of that. You do some form of CPD, which can be going to conferences like AHH, which is open to the public.
Yep.
We go along. It's very easy to book.
Yeah, we have an animal activities license now as well. We got it not too long ago, and we're starting doing external experiences coming in. Like you say,
but also if you're doing things like Lisa, that was just doing invertebrates at the moment in terms of encounters and stuff. So doing any kind of extra education for yourself, it will only help you with that license as well. So because you'll be seen as, no matter what, you're still trying to improve, because again, we're always learning something.
That's actually a good comparison. Again, going back to how I keep comparing zoological industry and professional keepers to hobbyists, and by no means am I using those words to say hobbyists are any worse. They're not. That's not what I'm saying. However, professional in-job keepers are encouraged to constantly keep up with modern information. They're encouraged to go to conferences to learn the newest things that are coming out, the newest findings. They're encouraged to keep up with studies and talk to other people to constantly keep this going up and up and up knowledge. Whereas hobbyists, there's no stipulation to do that. Whatsoever. Which is why the hobby often lags behind in quality and knowledge. But if you can, as keepers, kind of treat it that you need to constantly be learning, then you can go to these conferences and learn new stuff, do courses. They're not always huge courses as well. There are some smaller ones that can teach you some really good stuff. So without that stipulation, it does worry me that hobbyists don't look up and constantly keep up with things.
I think sometimes they see barriers with it. Sometimes scientific papers are a skill to read, that sort of thing. Not everyone has that skill of reading scientific papers. I struggle with a lot of scientific papers to read them sometimes.
The good thing is courses teach you how to do that. Yeah,
there are others, but it's that. A lot of time people don't necessarily know that there are courses out there to teach how to do, or even other outlets to be able to get that information and stuff, because it's not necessarily pushed out there of like, look, this is here, kind of thing. And I suppose especially for your general pet keeper, maybe doesn't necessarily realise that there's more information out there other than the little leaflet they were given by whatever pet shop they went to, sort of thing, that says whatever
brands.
Yeah. That people else go to have a look at and go, what the hell is this? Sort of thing. And so, but it's that thing, they don't necessarily realise that what's in there is wrong. They're going to take that as gospel. Sort of thing. Well, that's what this has said. This is for them a respectable company. Sort of thing. In their eyes. So surely what they're saying is right, and perhaps don't have that critical mind of let's question it. Is this what I've been told? Is this right? And going out there and trying to find their own information and stuff, and wade through, well, especially with the internet nowadays, pages and pages and pages of all sorts of stuff and conflicting information. Sort of thing, with to come up with their own sort of idea, their own way of like, okay, and not necessarily being able to go, well, I'll take bits from there and bits from there and stuff, and see what happens. It's normally, this is what I've been told from this person or this company or whatever. This is the first thing. Boom, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, and they'll base all of their husbandry over that experience. Yeah. Everyone should always be asking questions.
Yeah.
Always. Even if somebody has told you what they've said is all of the information and right, please keep asking questions. Always be asking questions. It's another thing we stress to students as well, is always be asking why. Why do we do that? One of the most dangerous things that pisses us off as professional keepers is the good old, we've always done it this way.
And that happens in every industry.
Every industry has that, but when it comes to animals, it's horrifically bad for the animals. We've always done it this way. It means that they don't look forward, they don't ask questions, and when the students come through and we're teaching them, we like I said, we tell them never stop asking questions. Always ask why. Why do you do it like that? Why have you done it like this for this long? And if the questions don't come, if the questions don't come back with good enough answers, ask again.
Yeah.
If that's not good enough, then why don't we do it differently? Why don't we do it better? Why don't we do it like this? Why don't we go and find out another way? Why don't we go and ask some more people that know this area better? Why don't we go and look and see if some studies have been done on this thing that we're questioning and we don't know? Always ask why, and look at your animals and ask why. Why do they do this? Why do I keep it like this? Care sheets are a massive problem with that as well. Bloody care sheets.
Yeah.
Oh.
But yeah, that goes through to the invert side of things as well. Like care sheets are not care sheets. Really are just you can keep the animal just about alive, kind of thing. Other than essentially provide them food and water, sort of thing. And here's a rough idea of here's a temperature that they'll survive at. So, doesn't go any really much more depth than that and stuff. And certainly with reptiles, I mean, the more in depth you get into it, the more you're like, well, actually, they can take so many different temperature ranges, sort of thing. And so it just shows really, a care guide should be probably a few hundred, if not more, pages long.
A good one, yeah, and its reference and citation list should be freaking huge.
Yeah.
There should
very little are.
Yeah, or none at all. It's just someone's opinion written out.
Yeah.
So, unusual pets. Where are you based?
She's in Wales.
Wales. Okay.
And so, hi, Sophie.
A lot of law stuff, legal stuff here in the UK. While we do like to say that we're better than places like the US when it comes to animal, laws, a lot of them are nothing to do with welfare at all. The AAL, the Animal Activities License, does have a lot of stipulations for welfare. It could be better, but there are a lot of stipulations for welfare in it. We always go back to the Dangerous Wild Animal License, which actually has nothing to do with welfare at all whatsoever. Entirely is to do with protecting people, the public, which frankly is deficient in my opinion. I feel like it should be much more in depth than that.
I mean, it's the same with zoo licensing. A lot of it is not actually to do with animal welfare. A lot of it is all to do with public safety.
Yeah,
a lot of the time. It's just and it's all like more and more we're trying to push licensing to be, that's important, but the animal welfare is just as important. I mean, it's only recently that UV lighting was put into zoo licensing. Very, very recently that became a zoo license thing of that reptiles need UV, and they're put in zoo licensing for all reptiles. All reptiles need to have measured, and they included the word measured UV lighting using a solar meter 6.5. So, but and that was only 2019, 2020 that got put in. So very, very recently.
People have a weird thing of thinking that right now, how we do things right now, we already know everything, but laws and stuff need constant improving. then you've got things like when you're inspected for some of these things, you might have inspectors that actually have no idea about the animals whatsoever.
Totally.
That are more focused on the legal side, the paperwork, your procedures, food safety and things like that, more than the animals in any way. Like Joe just said, there are amendments up for
Amendments
consideration.
coming up. It's definitely getting there. Now, it's always
that
part of
upward
it. It's always
slide.
going to be constantly improving it and stuff. And zoos and colleges and stuff. The good ones are at the forefront of trying to better, the licenses and stuff. Absolutely. Just to, as everyone, what the same is, they are expensive, but damn, they save you a hell of a lot of money in the long run.
Yeah. Oh, when we're talking about that, for everyone that's listening, I might as well just go through a few bits. There is not a replacement for the solar meter for the solar that brand of thing, the solar meter 6.5. There are other things that use similar names. They do not work the same. That is the one you need if you're getting it. Those little cards you can get that respond to UV, they're literally not useful at all. Yeah, they're crap. They respond to UVA as much as they do UVB, so they're not telling you anything. So please, if you can, save up and get yourself a UV meter, a solar meter 6.5. I promise if you keep quite a few reptiles, you will end up saving yourself money through not replacing those bulbs every 6 to 12 months as the guidelines tell you to.
And kind of actually recycling the bulbs down of going, right, it's no good for my bearded dragon, but it's now okay for my leopard gecko. Cool.
Yeah.
And stuff, and moving the bulbs like that, which is what
you can freak people out by using a 14% bulb with something that has a low UV requirement, because that bulb has been in use for like 2-3 years.
If you've got 10 reptiles, get yourself a solar meter 6. Save up for a solar meter 6.5.
Well, think about it. £20 a bulb. You're replacing them every 6 to 12 months.
Yeah.
If you're using a solar meter, you might end up replacing them every 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
Depending on the species you're keeping. If you're keeping a mix of high UV requirement and low UV requirement, just like Phil said, you can cycle those bulbs around and save a ton of money and know exactly how much UV your animals are getting.
That's it. You know exactly what they're getting. And then, you may have it, as this plucking figures out of the air, but if you got the right sort of, animals going down the different UVIs to the point where perhaps you're only spending like 20 quid a year on bulbs.
Yeah, depending on the situation, absolutely,
stuff.
And if you're really passionate, I mean, I'd still recommend getting one, even if you're only keeping a couple reptiles, because then you can teach yourself just how UV works by holding that solar meter and looking at how those bulbs work, how they put that UV out, how degradation works. They're fantastic pieces of kit, absolute fantastic piece of kit, and we teach students how to use them at work. We actually have 2 solar meter 6.5s for our students to use, and we actually routinely take conditions every week as well of all our herptiles and invertebrates. Let's see, Joe mentioned again, personally, you'd love to see college-specific licensing, as there's nothing covered for them currently. Specifically, yeah, absolutely. So the licensing is more surrounding zoos and animal experiences and pet shops. Nothing specifically for colleges. And there are some things, massively different between colleges and other animal facilities. So even though we work in a college, we work in that environment, we actually want there to be stricter laws for what we're doing.
Yep.
We would actually love to see our job become harder because the laws are telling us to do better. We want that. We want that pressure.
Yep.
Because that pressure would go across the whole industry and only good would come from it.
That's it, and I think, that goes for a whole bunch of zookeepers as well, where, sometimes we across the board rely on, the licensing to say, right, you need to have this, therefore we then actually get that piece of equipment or whatever. So, it's been then, their point as well. After with those T5, especially T5 bowls, after the UV's gone, you can still use them for plants. And stuff.
Just like
And just use them as ambient light. That's something that actually light levels is something that's being looked at a lot more now. The lux levels within our enclosures,
Kelvin, the color temperature, intensity with lux. There's a lot of stuff at lighting wise. The book is being written every other month. We are literally finding things out constantly that are blowing our minds, and Francis Baines and especially Roman Morin, when it comes to light intensity and color temperature and heat, is coming out with a lot of really mind-blowing ideas about them to change how we're thinking about it and how we're providing it. So please don't see all the brands of lighting and think that we've already worked it out, because we have not.
No.
We've not worked it out. We've not worked out, and this technology can improve so much, and it will hopefully keep improving.
That is a really good question.
Please, could you the leakage harm teas? That's actually a really great question.
That's a really good question. There's not a huge amount of information. I know of one paper that came out. It was either late last year or earlier this year, looking at UV usage for arachnids. But it's a very small study where they found like potentially UV could be detrimental to arachnids, but they stipulated that the study was so small that they couldn't say for sure, because only used like 4 tarantulas and 4 scorpions or something like that. So that's not enough. It's a really difficult one, but we've also got to think about what is that UV going through as well, because certain things, they will filter out UV, mesh filters out UV. If you got glass enclosures, that what type of glass is it, that might filter out the UV and stuff. So
the strength of it is a massive part of that as well. Some studies, especially older ones, will be using equipment that maybe wasn't great for the study itself. For example, there was a big pushback on using UV with blue-tongued skinks and royal pythons. I know this isn't invertebrates, but that came from a single study that was mentioning UV causing keratitis, basically UV damage to the eyes. But the results, if you actually read through it and took it apart properly, it was the equipment was exposing those animals to horrifically high amounts of UV, amounts that are not being recommended, and that equipment is not being used routinely. So you do have to be careful with studies on the methodology. So Francis Baines, for example, took that study apart and pointed those problems out. I do know that she has mentioned some work being done on a few invertebrates in UV. She did mention she's aware of some positives that have been mentioned with tarantulas and UV.
Yeah, we found certainly was pokies reflect. Pokies reflect UV light and potentially use UV light in the wilds and stuff. Certainly, we've seen certain scorpions will reflect UV light.
Yeah, why do scorpions reflect under UVA?
Yeah, so
that's an evolved part of their anatomy due to exposure to it.
Yeah, but I think it's getting those correct levels, and I think if you're using
correct levels, yeah,
what are known as reptile safe UV lights, whether it be AKAC, Reptile Systems. I mean, they're the two brands I only ever really mentioned. And so the chance of it being hugely detrimental to your tarantulas, I would say, is minimal. I mean, I haven't yet here, but I do know of zoos in the UK that put actually above their tarantulas have light wave units. So with 4 T5 bulbs over their tarantulas. So,
there are requests to use UV across taxa where it isn't usually being used. It's a new area of research and study. One of those is actually mammals. That they actually really want people to use UV with mammals more and do studies in it to find out the effects of it. That's something we're quite interested in ourselves. We actually do keep... Oh, go on. Yeah,
I was about to say it's now quite highly recommended for calatrichids, so marmosets, tamarins, so all those. I know, so I don't know which it was, but it actually got brought up in their zoo licensing inspection about UV light for their chimps.
Yep.
And stuff, and utilising UV light. Somewhere else it got brought up for their tigers.
Yep.
And stuff, and it's sort of like it's going to be something that's going to be looked at a hell of a lot more of giving access to UV light to basically all animals.
Yeah, so we have marmosets at the college as well, and we do have UV over the group. We do have a T5 bulb on the inside of their enclosure alongside a nice big halogen. So they are getting the same sort of aspects as our reptiles are getting. The thought process is the same. Our ground cuscus does have a full light cycle. So, it's nighttime in the nocturnal room during our daytime. But at our nighttime, his lights come on, including a UV bulb. He has access to that. And when we were inspected, and have been seeing people have actually looked at that and gone, wow, you're actually already ahead of quite a few zoos and professional collections because it's not being used for mammals. And it's being pushed now. What we've been keeping the cuscus like that since we got it.
That's really because of that
rodents as well.
Thinking that we said before, this is the way we've always done it. And we've gone, we give, whatever it might be, access outside, so it's going to get UV. And it's like, but our levels are very different to what they've evolved to deal with. Over the winter, you take a sonometer outside wintertime, you're not going to get much UVI at all.
Oh my god, the amount of UV that calatrichids get, the marmosets in the wild versus anything we get is incredible.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
It absolutely is.
To prove it, although it's definitely
it definitely is, Leah. It is hard work, but it does cost a lot of money.
Yeah, no, and you're actually making a pretty good point. Like, I agree, some of the technology does need to get cheaper for it to be used wider. Advancing isn't asking people to have everything perfect.
No.
Not perfect. It'd be brilliant if it could be. The expectation is that you want to do better and that you do try to do better when you are able to. Yep. That's the gist of it. When we get really deep and start ranting about these things, we're really passionate about it. It doesn't mean I'm saying you need to have every single piece of like full spectrum lighting. You need to have this bulb exactly. You need to have all these special pieces of equipment from this brand. I'm actually really tentative about mentioning brands myself. Because some of the biggest and most used brands actually still have quite questionable technology as well. And what they put out information wise. So I'm more interested in explaining how to use technology over what brands to buy, if that makes sense.
No, absolutely. I mean, unfortunately, we still have a lot of brands making red bulbs.
Yeah. Even the big ones that are making the technology we're really happy with and shouting about are still making and selling red bulbs and things like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's all like, well, we know that's so out of date.
Yeah.
Stuff, and okay, some people don't necessarily understand the actual reasons. And there's a lot of misinformation about it. And so, I mean, unfortunately, I still use them here, and I'm, for years been going like, we need halogens. I keep being told no. sort of thing.
And like I do agree as well that some of these changes cost a lot of money. Like halogens, when they blow, oh geez, when they pop and you have to replace them. Like our collection used to be on near enough all ceramic heaters. I changed it over to halogens, and it's costed us a lot more money. It's just something we take on the chest as like as that we're doing it because it's better for the animals. They'd totally survive if they were back on the halogens. So
New Mexico State University did a study on local species scorpion high mortality rates.
I'd be interested to see that, what they meant by highlight.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, I'm not judging it. I genuinely would like to see what they mean by that.
Michael's asked, what's your favourite exotic animal?
That's difficult. I mean, frankly, the more animals I work with, it changes.
I think we're all like that, though. Sometimes it depends on what it's doing on a certain day.
Yeah, it's as well. Like you can think about different ones as well. What's my favorite exotic animal in captivity is different from the wild.
Yep.
As well. I'm a big fan of skinks. Skinks were kind of my thing, as people will probably know if they've followed my stuff earlier on. I kept many skink species. And I'm quite a fan of the more social ones. So Carusha, the monkey-tailed skinks. I've never kept them, but I'd absolutely love to because they're social aspects. And onto that, I keep zebra skinks. They're incredibly social. They're actually maternally and paternally care for their young for months and stay in colonies after that as well. So I absolutely love them. They're brilliant. So yeah. And as well, like taxa. What's my favorite of different taxa? Oh.
It's always hardest question. Right?
Yeah. In terms of invertebrates, I absolutely love cockroaches. Cockroaches are awesome.
Yeah, cockroaches they're fantastic things.
I went through a phase for a few years of keeping loads of species of cockroaches. I think I had probably 37 odd species of cockroaches at peak.
Nice.
I was doing them shipments from York over in Germany.
Yeah.
Sharp and spinning. And then them, like, God, how do I pick one that I absolutely love? Husbandry tessellata, the spot. I absolutely love them. They're probably one of my favorite cockroaches.
They're good, solid roach. They're decent size, beautiful,
gorgeous, friendly.
Yeah, I've got them at work and stuff. One of my those are the inverts at work. Yeah, one of my favorite. I mean, right at the moment, in terms of work, my favorite invert at work at the moment is just Pacnoda marginata peregrina. This common sun beetle. They're in a mixed enclosure in my African Sands building. The enclosure is roughly 4x2x2, and there's 100. It's probably a good 100 or so adults at the moment out and about. And I think there's always early morning. There's it, but by 12 o'clock, whatever, they're all bumbling around, climbing around, put the food on the branches and stuff. And I probably am like, oh my god, there's all these beautiful beetles and stuff. They see them rather than the millipedes and the snails often.
Yeah, yeah, they're great. We've got about the same. We've got about a 4 foot by 2 foot by 2 foot like aquarium style glass tank for our.
That's what this is. It's literally is an aquarium that we convert. It was
with a mesh top.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably do the exact same thing.
Well, they've just got T5 lighting over the top.
Oh, brilliant!
Just a standard Koya background, and then literally every year, every autumn, just chucking all the dead leaves that fall down on the ground.
Yep.
and away it goes.
The way they breed as well, God.
And so, but again, so simple.
Mm.
So, Liz brought up a good point about, unfortunately, some people do just kind of attack if they don't see you as doing the same as them.
Yeah, I think that there's multiple sides to that. So if you're being approached and people are asking what you're doing and can you do better, you do have to be careful not to get too defensive. But you're absolutely right. There are so many people out there that will witch hunt instead of improve or instead of teach. It's something we're quite strict on in advancing. If you come here for help, we expect you to listen. But we also expect the people seeing and commenting on the post to treat you with respect as well. However, in many groups online and forums, it's horrific. It's really not nice.
Okay. I'm guessing Phil didn't brief you before asking you to come on the stream. Sunday night streams are well out there. This fun. We have random comments. It's about laying your head down, having a good time while getting information.
Yeah. Yep. It's like meeting people at a society sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's always a good experience.
Well, everybody goes out on Friday night drinking. We have our Sunday night stream.
Yeah. Nerds. Sharice chat question.
Hey, transfer rookie.
You should join us normally on our holiday streams when Phil hosts, because games night is really funny when Phil hosts, especially punishment.
So Tarantula Rookie, yep. So that's a good show of how that heat works. Infrared B, kind of getting further into the body, and the greenhouse effect is one to remember. Scales are built to allow heat to enter but not leave. And that's the greenhouse effect. If you have a greenhouse made of glass, if you go in there, it's way hotter than outside of it because the glass allows heat through, doesn't allow it back out. That's how they heat up. The ceramic heater doesn't allow them to do that because it's hitting their skin and not going any further. It's just like if you compare hugging a household radiator, water radiator, as soon as you let go of that and stand back, you get cold, which is why people, hug against them for ages. If you compare that to either standing in the sun or in front of a nice red roaring fire, because those flames, those red and orange flames, give off the same good heat as a halogen does. It heats you deeper and warms you up for longer. It gets to the blood vessels under the skin and allows them to thermoregulate properly. You've also got all the complex stuff about how that light affects their brain, their pineal gland. So the help me out here. I'm blank.
What commonly called the third eye?
Parietal eye. That's it.
Yeah. Well, for the layman, the third eye that often people refer it to.
Yeah, which is which your reptiles all have one. Near enough. There are a couple of exceptions in geckos, I believe, and that's used for working out hormone production in relation to light exposure and heat temperature, and the time of day. We know shingleback skinks, there's a study on them being able to track the time of day using their parietal eye, and they can use that to not only know the time of day, but they can know the time of day, know which direction it is, to be able to use that to find hides they already know about, to get to places they already know. So important, the way we heat and light our animals, and the different equipment makes a big difference.
That's it, yeah. And it's and we've certainly all been there and heated our animals, perhaps not efficiently. Certainly, certainly done that before. And so, but it's all that. I mean, at the moment, most people tend to say, try and do halogens where you can. So in terms of for eating, but we may change that in next year after, and may say something different. So
and that'll come from finding out more information and new technology coming out. You never know. A brand might come out with a bulb that actually is better. Although I will throw it out there, the deep heat emitters, DHPs, they're okay. They're better than ceramics, but they're not as good as halogens.
No, they don't. None of them do what they say they do.
They're not as good as advertised, which is really sad. I definitely choose them over ceramic heat emitters, 100%. But not as a dedicated basking lamp.
Yeah,
you need the light.
It's either Roman or Francis Baines. Either one of them or both of them said about that can be used something like a DP instead of a ceramic as just the background temperature,
ambient heating,
the ambient temperature within the enclosure. If you need that sort of thing, or at night time, because they DP pretty much puts out no light, pretty much very, very low light.
I think it's like 2 lux or something silly.
Yeah, exactly. As I say, if you want that night time, just safeguarding temperature, is to use that sort of thing. But to use some of the halogen as you're basking. So, as I think Adrad, about with the Euromastics talk, we sometimes think our animal, our reptile, sitting under our lamp for hours on end. Oh, it's loving that lamp. Actually, no, it's cold and it's never getting actually to the right temperature.
Yeah, it's maybe that lamp isn't powerful enough. It's not intense enough. It's not bringing them up to their preferred body temperature.
Yeah, whereas it perhaps should only be underneath that lamp for 10 minutes and then be off.
Yep.
So it's not just...
I mean, there's the whole multiple people spoke about it in their talks, which was absolutely amazing. But there are a lot of problems across the hobby with both a fear of not going too hot and a fear of not going too cold. And the truth with most of the species we're dealing with, especially all of the common ones we've mentioned, the ones that are the industry main species, they can deal with room temperature in a cool British house overnight.
Yeah,
absolutely fine. They don't necessarily always need supplemental heat then, because it's nighttime. In the wild, the sun will go down and they will then maybe look for heat in rocks and stuff that are still putting out heat they absorb from the sun. Other than that,
that's it.
They don't get geothermal heat or anything like that. And the same with the heat, like you said, going up to their preferred body temperatures. There are places in the wild where lizards and snakes are living where it gets 60, 70 degrees Celsius on the ground on surface temperature. And I do keep some of our species between 40 and 50 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
Coach whip snakes, for example. I know people that keep them closer to 60 degrees Celsius at their basking area because that's what they're built to go and bask under that for a while, then use that intense energy for their incredible fast movement and lung activity.
Years ago, I was given a couple of fringe fingered lizards. Many years ago, and the basking area I gave them halogen, rock under it, and now we get to a surface temperature of around 55 degrees Celsius for the tiny little lizards. But then they would be there literally for minutes and then be jumping around there. You could catch flies flying around.
Yep.
Stuff. And I was like,
they thrive in extremes, both extremes.
Yeah. But that was their only heat source. That would go off at night, and that would go right down to like 10 degrees.
Yeah.
And stuff at night.
I kept those. A good example of that actually is the some dwarf gecko species. Those terrestrial, really, really teeny tiny ones.
Oh yeah, triplet geckos and stuff.
Yeah, there's a few. There's like Studinary, and a few others. I had a colony of them, which I kept. Yeah, maybe not correctly, but it was an interesting observation. I actually kept them under a mercury vapor lamp, with rocks piled up underneath it. During the day, that rock was getting stupidly hot, and they were loving it. And then, as a turn to that, when it went to night, I actually had a window next to that glass terrarium open during the British winter, during the English Midland winter. And you know what? They loved it. They were calling. They'd call all night long in that cold temperature, because that's how it gets in their wild environment. You get the hot extreme, you get the cool extreme, and they will use both in different parts of their biology and behavior.
Yeah.
So people are always like, oh, it's getting cold. What should I do? The electric's gone out. Do I need to go and get a generator? Should I fill up some hot water bottles? Well, no. If you're only losing power for a few hours, or even a few days, honestly, a lot of reptiles are going to be perfectly fine with that.
I apologize, Ricky. I really apologize for the rudeness.
Did you hear that? Leah wants me to play that on the screen.
Oh, is it?
No need to apologise, Leah. It's all good.
I apologize, Ricky. I really apologize for the rudeness. I'm sorry.
It's all good, Leah. It's all good.
It's all right. It's not my stream.
But I'm going to do. I think it's 11 o'clock. So I think, is there any last questions before we wrap up? We can go in pretty much 3 hours.
So many animals here are very nocturnal due to high daytime temperatures. That's one worth talking about if people want. If you've heard the word Cathemeral before. So we've got diurnal, nocturnal, crepuscular. Diurnal being daytime behavior, nocturnal being mainly nighttime, crepuscular being dusk and dawn. There is a big push to start using Cathemeral more often, which actually means an animal doesn't prescriptively behave only at certain parts of the day. Thanks, Joe. It means that they will become active at any point of day or night, because they need something at that time, whether it's food to thermoregulate. And a lot of these animals actually will behave throughout the day and night and dusk and dawn, and we presume just by observations. But if we were able to watch those animals 24/7 in the wild, and we have with some species, we actually find that they'll come out all the time, random time, and then go away and hide again, and then come out again and cryptically bask, where they'll put like a limb or a tail out in the sun and get their UV and temperature exposure that way, rather than coming out into the open and being seen fully basking. There are some crazy behaviors that show how animals still use day and night, and you saw that comment from Joe.
As I say, you've been on top form, great stream. Cheers. Cheers,
Thank
Mark.
you. That's great to hear. You know where I am if you need any other questions answering.
Well, I think it's just gone past 11 o'clock, so we'll probably wrap up. I think everyone probably needs to go to bed. So well, massive thank you to Ricky
No worries. Thanks for having me on, Phil.
I've certainly found it interesting. And so, if you want to find out what reason, I'm going to put again just in the chat the link to HerpHQ YouTube, where you can find videos that reason. Also, Sam, who was in the chat earlier, as the other part of HerpHQ. There's a HerpHQ Facebook page. You can see stuff like, Sam's tortoise enclosure looks incredible. So,
absolutely, yeah. I helped to put the glass in for that. It was terrifying.
And the Advancing Herpetological Husbandry group is really fantastic. I mean, I don't think I've ever actually posted in there myself. I just read stuff all the time.
It's one of those things. It's there.
I'll see that, someone spots it and I'll read, something interesting in there, and like, oh yeah, I'll read this. So,
I think it's a good place as well, because one of its focuses as well is to foster the people that are, if you know what I mean by movers and shakers of an industry. We find those movers and shakers that want to change and find out good information, good things, try out great husbandry methods and new information that will be beneficial. And we want to foster those people to do what they do, to speak about it more and do more of that. Which, it's one of the reasons we've always pushed people like Frances Baines. She was already big, but we've tried to push her as far as we can as well within the herpetoculture.
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's great. So, I will say good night, and maybe we can, perhaps later on down the line, perhaps have you on again potentially. And
Happy to.
When more things come up, perhaps maybe before a conference or whatever, to chat about an upcoming conference next year, maybe.
Yeah, I'd be totally.
I'm sure he'll be back next year.
We're not too secretive. Happy to talk about things.
Well, cheers everyone in chat. Cheers for joining, everyone, especially if you've been here from the beginning.
Thanks, everyone. Hope it helps.
This channel is it on next week? Is it Christine's channel next week?
Mm-hmm.
So next week it's on Christine's channel, Spider-Man 1978. Until then, guys, take care, everyone. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.